Welcome to the Tuesday, January 9th, 2024 regular closed session meeting of the EBMUD Board of Directors. Roll call, Madam Secretary.
Director Chan,
Present.
Director Coleman,
Present.
Director Lenny,
Here.
Director McIntosh,
Here.
Director Patterson,
Present.
Director Young,
Here.
President Katz.
Here. We move to public comment. If members of the public are online and wish to speak on agenda or non-agenda items, please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom. Comments on agenda and non-agenda items will be heard now. Madam Secretary, are there any public comments online?
We have no hands online we have one hand online for public comment. Give me one moment. Can you please pass this to the president, and then one of the larger prints are for
Each person?
each board member. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna get the online public comment.
Yes, we'll begin with online.
Okay. Can you make me the co-host? Thank you. George Cleveland, you should be able to unmute your mic.
Thank you, Risha. Good morning, members of the board and everyone else in attendance. I just wanted to talk a little bit about HIV. If I'd been paying attention, I would have attended the LEDGE HR meeting. I was puzzled by something in the report that said it was for employees that were hired after July 1st, 1996, because that's not true, because I was hired in 95 and I see it on my retirement check. But I just want to ensure that it doesn't fall by the wayside. It would be helpful if the data that was gained over the last 20 years could be provided to everybody, because that was mentioned in the report as well about how the retirement board reviewed the data yearly. It would also be helpful to know why there wasn't a proposal to increase it back in 2016, why that was not brought to the board of directors, and I hope that it gets resolved quickly. I don't know that it's right that it should wait until the 2025 negotiations start. It's an issue now because it hasn't been raised in 20 years. The report that was provided to the retirement board in September talked about the Medicare retirees, but did not mention those of us retired folks who aren't eligible for that process yet. And I just want to make sure that it does continue to be upfront, because I kind of heard from somebody that staff, meaning employees, were kind of reluctant to do the work to potentially increase it, recommend that the retirement ordinance be changed so that it's not subject to negotiations, because that means it can't be touched but once every 3 to 4 years, and that's just not right, because the health insurance premiums and everything increase pretty much every year. And, like I said, it hasn't been changed in more than 20 years now, so it's time to be updated now. And that's all I'd like to say. So thank you much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cleveland. I'm very glad to see it appearing on the LEDGE HR committee agenda. We will hear reports about that either at the end of the regular meeting or in the future.
No other hands for public comment online.
Okay, Eric Larson.
Good morning, President Katz, board members, General Manager Chan. My name is Eric Larson. I'm president of AFSCME Local 444. I'm coming today to follow up on employee security concerns. The district has been assigning security guards to our after-hours crews who are working in the field on emergency main breaks and such after hours, and it's appreciated. It's helped provide more confidence for our workers out in the field and after hours to be able to focus on work and not other miscellaneous things going on around them. Tragically, an employee was assaulted while walking in the area around the administration building towards the end of December. And our security manager, David Cook, sent out a district-wide email to all employees reminding us to be cogent, present, and aware of our surroundings. He said that employees are encouraged to practice good personal safety and situational awareness. He says that whenever possible, do not walk alone. Try to have at least one other person with you. Do not use your phone while walking. If you wear a district badge, remove it. Know where you're going, walk with a purpose, observe your surroundings, avoid looking down at the ground. These are all good advice, and we appreciate it. I bring it up because AFSCME 444, and I believe 2019 as well, have a lot of employees in certain classifications, such as meter readers, meter mechanics, machinists, maintenance machinists, instrument techs, carpenters, painters, and electricians who are assigned solo field work. And in those situations as a solo field worker, you often can't pay attention to everything that's going around with you. In fact, you're oftentimes holding your meter and looking at the ground and doing all of these things that are really dangerous. And I bring that up because the district does have a required safety practice. It's RSP 5700, that's a solo worker safety, because I know that the district is concerned and has been a long issue with, how do you safely assign people solo work, because, it is inherently safer to do things in pairs if something does happen. And in that solo worker safety protocol, the district notes that the district does have a duty to assess risks to all employees, including solo workers, and take steps to avoid those risks where necessary. And it notes that the district has a duty to train the employees to perform the tasks safely, and the district has a duty to know which tasks should not be completed alone. And so we're asked the district and security to evaluate, minimize, and reduce the number of assignments of solo workers whenever possible, to assign people in pairs and to know and understand where our employees are going and what assignments should not be assigned as a solo worker situation due to the heightened security and safety risks that we see in the city today. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you very much for sharing that. Yvette Rivera.
Risha? Thank you. I provided one document to you that I know isn't legible. The reason why I sent it to you, or I just passed it out to you, or do you have that? Was that given out? The big one? Is because I'm going to send you the PDF. The PDF you'll be able to increase so you can see what the numbers are. That document accompanied this document, the 2014 Affirmative Action Plan. I'm also going to send you this document. The reason why I'm doing that is because at the previous board meeting 2 weeks ago, you heard about the SURE report, and you received it. You also received a copy of the winner's report. The numbers were bad then. I've alleged that the numbers are even worse now, under the helm of Mr. Derry Moten and now Ms. Cindy Sharon. If you look at that, when you get the emailed copy of the makeup of the ethnic makeup of district employees, please take a really close look at the section that I'm in, and that's David Briggs' section. It was the section that Clifford Chan was previously the head of. The numbers are atrocious now. And this morning, several members of this board heard Eric Larson talk about disciplinary action against a 20-year employee that is now in Skelly. And yesterday, you received an email from me that showed a mandatory mediation that was going to be held against me, it was rescinded, finally. These reports from me and the union about how employees are being disciplined, are being released, how the numbers for people of color and women are going down, are a big message to you. Stop relying on the people that are giving you these sugar-coated reports or asking you to pay for more surveys. All of the signs are out there. I'm going to end this by saying I really hate receiving Clifford Chan's annual update on how well the district is doing, because it doesn't say anything about losing $8 million, doesn't say anything about the Shante Scott settlement or all of the other lawsuits that came forward this past year, and all of the harassment and retaliation. But of course, the district is going to continue to sugarcoat what happens during the year and give you a nice report at the end. Hopefully one day, the district will be transparent and say we really are earnest in trying to change things. Thank you. I yield.
Thank you, Ms. Rivera. We will now, are there any other speakers online for public comment?
No further public comment.
We will now receive a presentation on the board's ethics policy and updates to the Brown Act and ethics laws. General Counsel McDonald.
It's in there.
Good morning, President Katz and members of the board, and Happy New Year. While Risha's calling up my presentation, I just wanted to note that I passed out a packet of reference documents to you. Extra copies are available from Risha for anyone that would like a copy. Those include a copy of the ethics policy itself, as well as some relevant statutes that we'll be discussing today. Oh,
You mind if I separate
it
these?
appears that it bypassed
This
some
might
of
be the
you.
one that was at your place, yes.
Does anybody else have one?
I think we're missing one over here.
It's not in the back of yours.
Oh, there it is, yeah.
And I would say that the key document in the packet is the ethics policy itself, which we'll be focusing on today, and you're all familiar with. So let's see if I have control. Okay. So today, as we do every year around this time, we're going to review Ethics Policy 6.04, and then we're going to look at update on legal developments in 2023 in the Brown Act, conflicts of interest under the Political Reform Act, and conflicts of interest under Government Code Section 1090. And of course, we're going to start with the ethics policy. In March 2004, the board passed Resolution 33414-04, which adopted at Policy 6.04, which is the ethics of the EBMUD Board of Directors, and it mandates Policy 6.04 shall be annually reviewed by the Board of Directors, together with a review of the Ralph M. Brown Act at the first meeting of the board in each calendar year or as soon as thereafter as practicable. Now, there's no directive in Resolution 33414 no directive in the resolution as to the degree of review of the ethics policy, and typically we handle it in a slide or two. But at the board retreat this year, one of the projects that we said we'd be working on together was the development of board governance policies. And right now, the only governance policy for the board is the ethics policy itself. And as such, it forms the foundation of some of the other policies that are being drafted and will be reviewed by you throughout this year. And so this year, for that reason, and because there really haven't been many developments in the Brown Act, Political Reform Act, or Section 1090, I thought we'd take a deeper dive into Policy 6.04 and go through each section just to note them and have a chance to address any questions and have that discussion. And then we'll move on to the statutory authorities. So the policy starts with responsibilities of public office, which reminds the board that it will uphold the state and federal constitutions and basically comply with the law and legally required training requirements, including ethics and sexual harassment prevention, and work in full cooperation with other public officials unless legally prevented from doing so. It guarantees a fair and open process involving the public by stating that the board will fully comply with the Brown Act open meeting requirements. And an amendment that was made last year was to discuss certain oral or written communications with persons regarding adjudicatory or quasi-adjudicatory agenda matters before the board. It discusses the board's promotion of fair and equal treatment, including the promotion of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and equality in personnel and contracting matters, not engaging in discrimination or harassment in the performance of official duties, not granting special consideration to any person or group beyond that of any other similarly situated person or group, and cooperating in achieving the district's equal opportunity objectives. It mandates that the board properly use and safeguard district property and resources, mandating that the board will safeguard district property against unauthorized use, removal, or loss, including through criminal acts or breach of trust. And I note that property under the policy includes equipment, money, and assets. The board will not ask or require district employees to perform services for personal benefit or profit. The board will protect and properly use district assets within their control, including information recording on paper or electronically, maintain accurate written records, including expense accounts, and adhere to district policies. The policy addresses the use of confidential information. Board members will safeguard confidential information and not disclose that information, provided that it legally qualifies as confidential, including information received for or during closed session meetings, attorney-client privilege information, or information that is exempt from disclosure under the Public Records Act, for instance, personnel records. Board members may utilize information to make complaints to a grand jury or a district attorney and disclose facts necessary to establish a violation of the law after bringing that matter to the president or the full board and providing an opportunity to cure the violation. And that is something stated specifically in the ethics policy that reflects a policy decision of the board. It addresses conflict of interest, really incorporated Section 1090 and the Political Reform Act by preventing a board member from having a financial interest in a contract before the district, participating or using their position to influence a board decision in which they have a legally prohibited interest, accepting honoraria, accepting gifts exceeding legal limits and complying with reporting requirements, and also board members shall not recommend the employment of a relative to the district or district contractor. It incorporates some campaign finance. Board member will not solicit or direct political contribution or in-kind services from district officers, employees, consultants, or contractors. Of course, the campaign finance reform ordinance governs many of these things in more detail than the policy itself. The board will not solicit or direct political contributions or in-kind services from vendors or consultants with a material financial interest in a matter pending before the district, and the board members will not use the district seal, trademark, stationery, or other district indicia in soliciting political contributions. The policy briefly addresses incompatible offices, stating that if you accept an office with another agency, an elected position or an appointed position, you'd have to resign from the district when the duties of that office may contradict with the duties as an EBMUD board member. So for instance, a board of supervisors regulates many of the activities of the district. So if you were to prevail in an election for the board of supervisors, you would need to resign from the district, provided that board of supervisors has jurisdiction over our service area. And then it provides some directives on your candidate statements. It defines the board member and general manager relationship, and I will state that this is one of the areas that we are breaking out into a separate policy and providing some more detail on. But it basically, it specifies that the board provides policy directions and instructions to the general manager, and then board members deal with matters within the authority of the general manager through the general manager, as opposed to directly with staff, except when a matter pertains to the functions of the general counsel. It mandates that the board exercise responsible fiscal management, and these provisions were also updated this year. It discusses the maintenance of a system of auditing, and we added new auditor retention provisions this year at the request of Director Chan, and so those are new provisions. And then the ethics policy incorporates a whistleblower protection policy that mirrors state law, and basically it mandates that the general manager has the primary responsibility for compliance with personnel policy and for investigating violations and taking appropriate corrective and disciplinary action. The board's role is to ensure that the general manager is operating the district according to board policies and the law. Board members are required to disclose to the general manager improper activities within their knowledge, and then they will not interfere with the general manager's investigation and remediation, and will not, of course, board members will not directly or indirectly use their position to discourage whistleblowing. This is also going to be broken out into a separate whistleblower policy. Director Coleman.
Okay, I know we're working on a whistleblower policy. The second bullet, it says the district operations include HR, engineering, and everything else. So it's the general manager's roles and responsibilities to make sure they're happening properly. Where does the Office of General Counsel come in? Because I know that I think you sign off, or somebody signs off on every BD1 from your office, I believe, or many of them.
No, we do. The BD ones are signed off by the general manager.
Okay. Well, there's some, what's your role in relationship?
So the Office of General Counsel's role is to provide legal advice to the general manager and to district
Okay.
staff, and directly to the board. And that is our role in a nutshell, and in addition to prosecuting and defending litigation on behalf of the district.
So, having said that, the general manager has oversight over HR, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes, the Office of General Counsel has oversight over no other department or division. We exist solely to provide advice and handle litigation.
Thank you.
Another provision of the policy that will be broken out into a separate policy are details on compensation and expense reimbursement, and this details board attendance at meetings so that you can receive your salary, and it discusses reimbursement for engaging in outside activities. And then the policy itself concludes with violations of the ethics policy and how that should be handled. It states that all violations should be referred to the president for investigation and consideration of appropriate action. Where the president is the officer that is alleged to have violated the policy, then the violation should be referred to the vice president. And then the policy includes several legal remedies. And I note that the language is including but not limited to. So that's a presentation on the ethics policy. Are there any questions on the policy? Yeah. Okay. Moving on to the Brown Act itself. If you recall, the big issue last year was remote appearances during states of emergencies, and you will recall that during the pandemic, Government Code Section 54953 was amended to allow for remote appearances during a declared state of emergency. It had a few provisions that were not well thought out. So, for instance, it required the governing body to meet not less than every 30 days to make findings in support of continuing remote appearances. Those findings were that the legislative body has reconsidered the circumstances of the state of emergency, and any of the following circumstances exist: that the state of emergency continues to directly impact the ability of the members to safely meet in person, or state or local officials continue to impose or recommend measures to promote social distancing. So this year, last year, AB 557 recognized that it was difficult for some bodies to meet every 30 days. That wasn't their normal meeting frequency if they met once a month. And so AB 557 extended the period to hold a meeting for a continuing resolution every 45 days, which allows agencies to, reduces the circumstances in which they may have to have a special meeting just to pass a resolution to allow for remote appearances. And it also eliminated the necessity of making a finding that state or local health officials have imposed or recommend social distancing measures. This gives the board more flexibility in determining whether or not a declared state of emergency continues to directly impact the ability of board members and the public to meet in safety.
So,
State of emergency requirement is still held.
Yes, these provisions may only be used during a governor-declared state of emergency. Now, one of the changes that was made in 2022 that I wanted to revisit this year was the new allowance for remote appearances for emergency circumstances or for just cause. Because quite frankly, the provisions stating the number of times these circumstances may be used weren't necessarily well thought out, and so it takes a bit of parsing to provide you with directions on how many times may you appear remotely each year for emergency circumstances or just cause. And so for just cause, it is 2 meetings per year. Emergency circumstances, there's no limit on how many meetings you can meet for remotely. You can attend remotely due to emergency circumstances, but cumulatively, you may only attend a meeting remotely for just cause or emergency circumstances no more than 3 consecutive months, or 20% of regular meetings for the local agencies within a calendar year, or no more than 2 meetings if the legislative body regularly meets fewer than 10 times per calendar year. But what does this mean for the district, given that we have committee meetings and we have regular meetings? Well, AB 2449 refers to meetings of the legislative body, and the Brown Act defines legislative body to include committees. And so based on this, a board member may use an EBMUD board member may use the just cause exception for 2 regular meetings and 2 committee meetings per year for each committee on which a board member sits. Cumulatively, a board member may use either circumstance exception for no more than 3 consecutive months for regular meetings or each committee on which the board member sits. And cumulatively, a board member may use either the just cause or the emergency circumstance exception for no more than 4 regular board meetings per calendar year. So if you think that you're bumping up against your remote appearance quota, please contact Risha, and Risha will confer with me and will provide you with advice. So.
Derek?
Yes.
The board still needs to accept or validate the inclusion. This includes, right, so the board still needs to approve the
validity of the emergency.
That is correct, yes, yes. This, today I'm only addressing the number of times that the exceptions may be used. But the board must still, if it is a last-minute emergency, the board must first vote to agendize consideration for allowing the remote appearance, and then vote on allowing the remote appearance itself. So now let's talk about updates to the Political Reform Act. Last year, I discussed the Levine Act, which was made applicable to elected officials and not just appointed officials in 2023. It prohibits an officer and official from accepting, soliciting, or directing a contribution of more than $250 from any party or participant with a financial interest that the officer knows or has reason to know has a matter pending before the agency involving a license, permit, or other entitlement for use. And I put those terms in quotes because this year the regulations have been promulgated that clarify some of those terms. And so those are what I want to go over with you today. First, I note that the Levine Act is more expansive than the EBMUD's campaign finance ordinance. Right now, the ordinance in its current form prohibits all donations from contractors, but it does not discuss licenses, permits, or other entitlements for use. The Levine Act also applies to participants, which in theory means a person with a financial interest in a contract who opposes the award to that contract to another person, as an example, provided that the contract is not a low bid contract. So it broadens the scope of prohibited contributions. Under the Levine Act, the restrictions on donations and 1 year after the action on the entitlement, regardless of whether or not the entitlement is granted, that's a bit broader than our ordinance. The Levine Act also requires, if an officer knows that they have accepted a donation from a party or participant in the 12 months prior to the consideration of entitlement, they must announce the donation and recuse themselves from participation. Yes?
Permit, it seems it's some kind of flag for me, because we just had a briefing, for instance, on ADUs. So is somebody that's applying for water service, getting a permit for water service, prohibited from making a contribution for a year following their application? Or how do we necessarily know?
Yes, and that's a very good...
Given that there's, 1.4, whatever, that seems, some of it seems a little bit unknowable, and obviously we're not granting the license or approving. I mean, we
Yes,
can know what contracts are being let because they come before us in in BD1s, but.
Yeah. No, that's a good question. It's one we discussed briefly during the campaign finance reform ordinance presentation this morning. One of the Levine Act regulations states that a license, permit, or other entitlement for use is a proceeding that is not ministerial. So our water services applications, as far as I understand them in the process, and I believe legally, are ministerial proceedings. In other words, if you apply for water service,
Okay.
and if you meet the requirements, we're going to give you water service, and we have no choice in the matter. The Levine Act really applies to licenses, permits, or other entitlements for use where there is some sort of adjudicative process or thought. It may, for instance, apply to an appeal on the revocation of a wastewater discharge permit, which is a rare event to the extent it comes to the board, but there is certain discretion involved in whether or not, and so that would be a discretionary process.
Okay.
But for the hundreds of water service applications we received this year, don't believe the intent of the Levine Act is to prohibit you from accepting donations.
That's helpful.
Derek, I don't know if the previous slide had it or if you stated it. You can go back one. That caught my attention. The $250 from any party, how's that apply to employees here that work here if they are receiving money or gifts for the work they do?
So the Levine Act is directed at campaign contributions.
Okay.
So it is not, it's separate from gifts, and which are handled under other provisions, Section 1090, and so, and the districts, I mean, we have a whole procedure on the acceptance of gifts that mandates that we can't accept gifts from contractors, for instance.
We do have that.
But the Levine Act is directed at
Specifically.
campaign finance.
Okay.
So as I mentioned, this year there have been updates, clarifications on the Levine Act. For instance, when is a proceeding pending for an officer? Well, regulations adopted in 2023 state that the decisions before the officer or governing body, when it's placed on the agenda for discussion, so at that point it's pending, or it's reasonably foreseeable that the decision will come before the officer and the officer knows or has reason to know that it's within the jurisdiction of the agency. So if you have independent knowledge that a matter will be coming before you, that you will be required to decide upon whether or not to award a contract, and again, we're talking only about non-low bid contracts, then that's considered pending for your purposes. A proceeding is pending for a party or participant once it's within the jurisdiction of the agency. So earlier than the agendization, once an application has been filed, or once, for instance, a solicitation for a bid, for a contract has been provided to the district. An officer is not at risk of violating the Levine Act by accepting a contribution from a party or participant when the officer does not know or have any reason to know about the proceeding. So what does know or have reason to know that a participant has a financial interest in a decision? Know or has reason to know means that if you have actual knowledge of the financial interest, or the participant reveals facts in written or oral statements during a proceeding before the officer that makes the person's financial interest apparent. And then the officer is an officer aware of any of the following facts has reason to know of a participant's financial interest. So to put this in context, if there is a contract before the board that is being awarded on the basis of merit, a competitive process and not low bid, if a person opposing the process comes before the board and states any of the following facts, you then become aware that they have a financial interest. One of those facts may be, I own property located 500 feet within the project that this contract pertains to. That's a financial interest. Or if the participant says they have an economic interest in a business entity that may see a significant increase or decrease in customers as a result of the proceeding, or perhaps the contract at issue. Or the participant has a business relationship with the applicant that may result in additional services provided to the applicant. I will say that the Levine Act is very complicated. One final thing, an officer does not know or have reason to know of a participant's financial interest solely as a result of the participant identifying the economic interest located in the general business vicinity of a business entity or real property at issue. So if someone says, I live within the area, that may not put you in notice of the participant's financial interest. If they say, I live across the street, that would put you on notice. But the Levine Act is very complicated, so you should always consult with OGC if you have questions regarding contributions, campaign contributions, in relation to any person who may have business before the district or opposed certain business before the district. Yes?
What if somebody's running for the East Bay Mud seat, they're not currently on the board? Your advice to seek advice from the Office of General Counsel, does that hold for, is that made known to candidates that are declared and running for, are they entitled to the same legal opinion as, because they obviously don't know very much about all of
Right.
the working, so do they automatically get covered under the wouldn't know or have reason to know, but they might know? Right? I mean, but they probably haven't been briefed on the ins and outs of the Levine Act.
Correct. So they are only entitled to my advice once they are seated as an officer, as an elected official. Until then, the Levine Act doesn't implicate them because they're not an elected official.
Okay, so it only applies to people that are in elected office.
Correct.
So
And what, yes,
if contractor X, who's up for a contract with East Bay Mud, wants to max out a donation to a candidate running for East Bay Mud, there's nothing to prohibit them from doing that.
that
Or from
is,
the candidate from accepting that.
that is correct. There, I believe there may be provisions in the Levine Act that would require a return of the money, or a
If they're
disclosure.
if they're elected, or,
If once they assume office, if they have received funds from a person from a party or participant in the previous 12 months, I believe, and I'll have to look at this in more detail.
could you get back with
Yeah,
the answer
sure.
on that? Because it's,
Yes. But I believe there are provisions in the Living Act that would require them to make a refund or announce and recuse. So, but I'll look at that in more detail.
thank you.
I think it's also interesting to point out something that was in the original Levine Act, which was that the coverage includes appointments, appointed offices, that are appointed by the governing body, for example, the joint powers authorities that, or external committees that we may serve on. Previously, those roles were not covered by ethics laws. Do you want to comment on that, if you're familiar with it?
I'm not deeply familiar with it. My understanding is that the Levine Act did previously apply to appointed officials, meaning, for instance, persons appointed to state commissions by the governor. Those persons don't, yes, and so that would apply. And I think in theory, persons appointed by East Bay Mud Board to JPAs, if a contract becomes before the JPA, then the Levine Act, I believe, would have applied to them.
It does now, yeah.
Yeah, it certainly does
There was a time
now.
before where it didn't, yeah.
The change made in 2023 was that it was made to apply to elected officials and not just appointed officials. But since inception, I believe it is applied to appointed officials. So. And then finally today, I just briefly wanted to discuss a change to Government Code 1090. Really an addition of a statute that has answered questions that have long vexed public entities, including East Bay Mud, and that is really when a contractor who works on the preliminary stages of a project may then bid for subsequent work on the same project. Courts have found that independent contractors may be officers for the purpose of Government Code Section 1090's prohibition on making a contract in which the officer has a financial interest. So as a result, independent contracts have been precluded from bidding for work on projects in which they've been involved during the design phase because courts have said, well, you helped make the contract. You drafted the contract. You helped make it, so you can't now bid on it. So AB 334 added Section 1097.6 to the Government Code, which really codified several years' worth of Attorney General and court clarifications on the applicability of Section 1090 to independent contractors. First, 1097.6 says that an independent contractor is not considered an officer if the contractor's duties and services related to the initial contract did not include engaging or advising on public contracting on behalf of the entity. And engaging or advising on public contracting means preparing or assisting the public entity with any portion of the public entity's preparation of a request for proposals, request for qualifications, or other solicitation regarding subsequent or additional contract, subsequent or additional contract with the public entity. Now, you may have engaged in, for instance, preparing part of a specification, which means that you are considered an officer. However, AB 334, Section 1097.6, provides further exceptions even if you are considered an officer. You are not disqualified from bidding on the subsequent contract under Section 1090 if you did not engage in or advise on the making of the subsequent contract during the initial performance during its performance of the initial contract. And that term means that your participation was really limited to conceptual, preliminary, or initial plans or specifications. So for instance, we've had companies that have performed dive services to do, I guess a LiDAR survey of reservoir bottoms, and then wanted to know if they could then bid on subsequent dive services for the actual work to be done. And the findings have been that, well, your participation was really conceptual, preliminary, and really you were only involved in the initial plans or specifications. And then the second caveat is that all bidders or proposers for the subsequent contract must have access to the same information, including all of the conceptual, preliminary, and initial plans or specifications. So this revision to Section 1090 really, it will help staff, it will help the Office of General Counsel. It probably won't come before you much unless someone challenges the award, for instance, of a specification. AB 334 may come into play. So. And I will end with the statement that OGC has long been giving. Ethics laws are many, multi-layered, and complex. You should consult early with the Office of General Counsel or the Fair Political Practices Commission. And I provided a phone number there, and they have much information on the internet. So at this point, I'll take any questions.
Quick question, Jeff,
Yes.
going back to the ethics policy. You know, you talk about it being for the board of directors. Is there an ethics policy for the managers and employees at East Bay MUD?
There's not anything specifically entitled ethics policy. However, there are policies, numerous policies and procedures that implicate the ethics of district employees, managers, et cetera. So for instance, there, as I mentioned, there is a procedure prohibiting the acceptance of any gifts from any contractors doing business with the district. There's the employee discipline procedure that talks about behavior and what is considered acceptable or not acceptable. And so numerous policies, in fact, I would say almost every procedure and then the district kind of mandates the actions and the standards to which staff are held accountable.
So it sounds like it's over multiple things I think you don't have a book, but to the computer, swiping to get to it, correct? It's not in one place where an employee, whomever it may be, can go to it?
Well, it is certainly in one place on Splashpad that all of the policies are listed, and you can even search for a policy by name. And so the trick is really to find the policy or procedure applicable to your question and then drill down.
Well, I would like to see, I'm glad we all have that, or it's there for the employees and managers, something in our policies and procedures, a tab specifically titled that, and putting it in there so the public as a whole, the public can't go on Splashpad and look at this stuff, I believe. And if it's hard to find and maybe not all employees use Splashpad, I don't know, but put it in ethics policy where everything is listed so any employee can go to it, find it, and not have questions of, well, did I miss it here? Did I miss it there? That's what I'd like to see. I don't know if others agree with me.
John, that sounds to me like what we're doing with the board, with our board policies, is we're aggregating it and putting it under one policy.
So this
That's
will
what
be,
that's what I remember from the retreat that we did. So, I mean, why couldn't we do the same thing for the employees in general?
make it easy for them.
Yeah, just to refer to one policy.
Well, again, the employees' duties are many and varied, and so that's why there are, I'm not sure how many procedures, but certainly hundreds of pages worth. And so they don't all neatly fit under the category of ethics. Rather, they are specific to contractor or other areas.
I just am saying this is a transparency issue for the public as a whole. The public does not have the ability to see the portal that you were talking about. That's only for, that Splashpad, that's only for employees. If somebody were doing a search on Google or the internet, they would be spending God knows how many hours trying to find it. And just have a thing.
An index, is that what
Yeah.
you're talking, an index?
Just,
single
just being
index.
transparent about it, so somebody and the employees can find it at ease.
Yeah.
That's what I would like to see done.
Sure, and I fully understand. So maybe we can just look at our existing policies and procedures and come up with some options on, a public-facing portal and how to provide more information to the public
That would be awesome.
and bring that back to you.
Yeah.
So- Are there any further questions?
We do have two speaker cards, and I will entertain those speakers. And I will first call on Yvette Rivera.
Thank you. I just have a question about gifts. And I know that this is about gifts that the board members are allowed to get. But when I first was hired and I'm glad that you brought up that we should have something similar for employees, because when I was first hired at the district, I was told that employees could receive gifts. And I was told that by my superintendent and a senior admin that had been here for many years. And I recall them showing me some policy where the gift needed to be less than either $25 or $50. But because I've worked at other agencies, I knew that I was not going to accept any gifts from anyone. So when tree companies wanted to offer me a hat or a T-shirt, I would say no, thank you. But I would see employees throughout the district with contractor T-shirts and hats, and it's a cool thing. It's a nice, I really love the tree emblem just because it's a personal like. But for myself, because I worked at other agencies, I wouldn't do it. So I think it would be great if this would be clear, because I don't want any employee to be penalized because of this issue not being directly dealt with. I do get a contractor that sends a token every Christmas, and I don't keep it. I asked the superintendent at the time, can I tell them to stop sending this? And they said, it's less than $10. So I said, well, I'm not going to keep it. I'm going to give it to the senior admin, or I'm going to throw it out. But other than that, anybody tries to hand me something, I say no. So I'd like for employees to be protected and not ever be accused of doing something against the district rules. Thank you. I yield.
Thank you.
I will ask the question, so that the board members as elected officials are covered by gift limits, both the reportable limit and an absolute limit of what we can accept, even if we were to report it. What are limits? Do those same limits apply to staff, or do we have a different policy that applies to staff, and then how is that communicated?
There is a procedure on gifts for employees, and the overarching is that you don't accept gifts from people that we're doing work with. There's a description of like what is a gift and what isn't a gift. Like if they give you some informational materials, that's not considered a gift. But other things are considered gifts. So within the procedure, it outlines this is what a gift is, this is what a gift isn't. And so we outline that for employees as far as what they can accept. And certainly happy to provide to the board that procedure that we do provide to that employees are governed under.
And that's procedure 418. I'm looking at it right now, and it is very explicit on its prohibition on accepting gifts, and it goes into great detail as to what constitutes a gift. So any employee with questions should definitely refer to procedure 418. The gift reporting that you're talking about, if you're talking about Form 700, that is different. That is reporting under the Political Reform Act, in which we must also report certain officials, including myself and other folks listed in our ordinance, must report gifts from non-district, from anybody. So, the year that, I had a baby shower was a nightmare. So it was, but that's separate than employees accepting gifts from contractors, vendors, et cetera.
Along those lines, and I've talked with Derry about this, and I mentioned it before, allegedly, I'll use it that way, a contractor was asked to get a gold ring for they and their spouse. They chose not to. How do they report it as a whistleblowing because this person was fearful of losing a contract with us? How do they go about that where they are not going to be put in potential jeopardy of not getting a future contract from a supervisor as well. And again, I say it's allegedly, and I've asked that they speak to Derry specifically about it.
I think this is a subject maybe Director Coleman, I should discuss with you offline first, and then we can provide an update to the full board as needed.
Okay.
And next speaker card is Eric Larson.
Good morning. Thank you, President Katz. Thank you, Derek, for your presentation. You noted in your presentation that the general manager has authority to intervene in disciplinary proceedings. This morning at the Ledge HR committee meeting, I presented concerns about HR's inability to intervene in disciplinary proceeding, and when the board members had questions about that, Derek, you interrupted them and told them that it wasn't agendized and kind of shut the discussion down. And so I'm asking the general manager to intervene because there is a serious problem that HR has no authority to take control over an employee relations investigation in disciplinary proceedings. They just recommend actions. The supervisors and superintendents do the investigations and make determinations on discipline, which leaves the union regularly filing grievances and going to arbitration over harassment and inequitable treatment of our members when we have retaliatory and vindictive superintendents conducting pretextual investigations with the intent to transfer the problem. They intend to transfer the problem. I've got a case right now, a notice of intent to terminate a 20-year employee with no past history, no record of discipline, and a superintendent with no managerial skills or no people skills comes down on my member on a blazing hot day with two of his assistants and then alleges workplace violence against my member without contacting security. And then 4 days later, has my member removed from the workplace and placed on paid administrative leave pending the investigation. An investigation that took 6 months before issuing a notice of intent. An investigation alleging workplace violence, but never involving security. Despite the Workplace Violence Security Protocol 1.5 that says that security must do an investigation to determine if there's a credible threat of violence. It never happened. A 6-month investigation conducted by superintendents interviewing only 4 other supervisors and the member. A 6-month interview, a 6-month investigation to interview 5 people. And then the superintendent and manager got together to write the determination letter and decided to terminate the employee, a 20-year water distribution crew foreman, a 20-year water distribution crew foreman with no past history, no history of discipline. And supposedly, HR's hands are tied and employee relations can't do anything, and we're going to have to go to arbitration and have our member reinstated. All the while, our member is at home watching Netflix. So we're asking the general manager to intervene in this disciplinary case, this trumped up charges, and avoid us having to go to arbitration to get our member reinstated. Thank you for the time, and Clifford, I'm sure we'll have some follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Seeing no further public comment or questions from board members, we will now convene to conference room 8 for closed session and are scheduled to return for the regular meeting at 1:15 p.m. Welcome to the Tuesday, January 9th, 2024 regular business meeting of the EBMUD Board of Directors. We will receive reports from the December 11th, 2023 DERWA meeting and this morning's Planning and Legislative Human Resources Committees under item 17. Roll call, Madam Secretary.
Director Chan,
Present.
Director Coleman,
Present.
Director Lenny,
Here.
Director McIntosh.
Here.
Director Patterson. Director Young.
Here.
President Katz.
Here. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our first item is election of officers for 2024. The floor is now open for nominations for president of the board. Director Chan and then Director Patterson.
Oh, I would just like to nominate Lisa McIntosh to be president of the Board of Directors at EBMUD.
Is there a second?
Yes, I second that.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other further nominations? Seeing none, is there a motion to elect Vice President McIntosh to be president
I
of the
so
board?
move.
Moved by Director Patterson,
Yes.
seconded by Director Chan. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, the motion carries. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And as I pass the gavel, I just want to thank the board for your trust in me in serving as your president for the year 2023. It was truly an honor to serve you and to be the leader of this organization for our centennial year. It was incredible to celebrate, along with all of you and our general manager, all of the accomplishments for 2023 as well as the last 100 years. And here's to a new 100 years. So as we move from our centennial year and look to the future, I'm excited to continue to work with all of you as a director and with President McIntosh. We also are completing really what we talked about in concept in 2022, which is to transition to a board presidency that tends to move annually. Like many of our constituent cities and sister special districts, this will help us work together as a team and share a leadership role, which is really a first among equals, where, so that was something that we had discussed, and we're now making that transition, and I'm glad that we are doing that. So with that, I will turn it over to President McIntosh for the election of Vice President of the Board.
Thank you, Andy. And it's been a pleasure serving under you. You
Yeah,
did a
thank you.
great job in 2023.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so let's have it.
Oh, yeah.
All right, everyone. So we move for the open nominations for Vice President of the Board for 2024. A motion and a second is required for each name nominated. Do we have a nomination? I nominate Bill Patterson.
I will second that.
Are there any other nominations? All right, we have a motion and a second. Let's have, do we need a roll call or just a general? Mhm.
Just to follow what we did for the first one, if someone can put forth a motion to elect.
Okay, so can we have
So
a
moved.
motion to elect?
So moved?
Okay, Bill Patterson is vice. All right,
Seconded by Doug.
all right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? So it's unanimous. Bill, welcome as Vice President of the Board.
And can we have a nomination to close can we have a motion in a second to close the nominations after Director Patterson's?
All right,
comment?
do we have a motion to close the nomination?
So moved?
All right, we have a motion and a second to close, Risha.
And that is from Director Katz and Director Lenny?
Yes.
Right.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Bill, you were about to say something.
What I was about to say is that, sometimes we get it right. Sometimes it lines up right. We got critical issues facing the district. It's going to take all of us collectively working closely in harmony to overcome the obstacles that lie ahead of us. We've been enumerating a number of things today. And personally, I came loaded today because, not because of the election, but because of the issues. And I think if we close ranks, bring the best of us, we can pass the test both of time and of the important issues that lie ahead of us. Hopefully, in this time, the family will come back together and we will be an exemplary agency on the forefront of what we're facing currently for our constituents and for our very lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill, for those comments. 2024 committee assignments. Each board member has the committee preferences form at the dais seat. Please review and provide your preferences to the secretary by Friday, January 12th. The proposed assignments will be discussed and considered at the January 23rd regular meeting. There are no announcements from closed session, and we do have a special presentation, Civicorps Conservation Championship Award. Mr. Chan.
Yes, so for the last 39 years, the district has partnered with Civicorps to assist with the maintenance of our watershed lands in the East Bay. On November 2nd, 2023, at the Civicorps' 40th anniversary celebration, EBMUD received the Conservation Champion Award, recognizing the district's dedication to Corps members' employment and Civicorps' conservation and community efforts. Civicorps is a nonprofit organization that provides services as part of a job training and educational program benefiting at-risk youth and public agencies in Alameda and Contra Costa counties. At Civicorps, young adults develop their professional skills, complete their high school diploma, and strengthen their career readiness for upwardly mobile careers in conservation. Participants gain meaningful work experience while engaging with local employers, explore college and career options, and receive support to equip them with the resources needed to advance their personal and professional goals. Civicorps Conservation Career Pathways Program provides East Bay youth with paid job training and exposure to sustainable careers in conservation and public service. Civicorps partners with local employers to provide work-based learning and experience that serve as bridges to careers in land and vegetation management, conservation, and recycling. In 2022, EBMUD developed a community trainee program to provide training and work experience for trainees referred from community-based job training programs such as Civicorps. In April 2023, the first 2 trainees successfully completed the program. One trainee was hired as a permanent grounds maintenance position at a local city, in part due to their experience at EBMUD. The second trainee, Judith Verdin, is here with us today. She is a part-time ranger naturalist with the district. Together, Civicorps and EBMUD are working to improve outcomes for the future of local youth. Here today, presenting the award are Tessa Nicholas, Civicorps Executive Director, and Monique Williams, Civicorps Conservation Program Coordinator. Tessa and Monique.
Thank you so much, General Manager Chan. And we have more of the family with us because who doesn't love an awards presentation? So we wanted to bring some of our current Corps members, and of course, super excited that Judith was able to join us too as an alumni of Civicorps and current EBMUD employee. As General Manager Chan said, Civicorps is a local certified conservation corps serving 18 to 26-year-olds throughout the East Bay. We just celebrated our 40th anniversary, and upon reflection, we wanted to really look back and say, how have we gotten here? For a nonprofit workforce development organization, we've gone through many programming changes, but we are thriving, and we could not do that without partners like East Bay MUD. East Bay MUD's been with Civicorps, formerly East Bay Conservation Corps, since the beginning. Since 1984, we've been partners in this work, and the pathways and opportunities that have been created because of this partnership are really remarkable. So we're excited to present this Conservation Champion Award to East Bay MUD for your steadfast commitment to providing opportunities for workforce development and for providing bridges into long-term employment for young people in the East Bay. We have many success stories, but Monique Williams is here to share a bit about her path as well.
Hello. My name is Monique Williams, and I am the program coordinator at Civicorps. I am a former Corps member, so I was in their shoes once before. 20 years ago, I had the lovely opportunity of being in the SEP program, where I gained viable skills for employment. Also worked with our crews, and I am just very, very grateful for East Bay MUD to. Sorry, I didn't know what was happening. I am very, very grateful for all what you guys have done for us for Civicorps. So thank you guys so much.
And we have two current Corps members, AJ and Henri's here to present the award. I believe Director Katz is coming forward, or President McIntosh, or both of you. Whoever wants, all of you, would be great. And of course, we'd love a photo op if we can.
Yes.
All right.
And this is on behalf of the whole board, because you do work all over our service area. We are all
do.
appreciative for the work that Civicorps, your programs do year after year. And it's really, I'm really proud to know that you're not just any old chapter in the Conservation Corps movement. Civicorps is really here to serve Oakland and the East Bay by providing that fire prevention service, helping to save lives and property with the vegetation management programming that you're doing. You're here to. It's not just a youth internship. We are benefiting from workforce development. Our sister agencies are benefiting from that workforce development. I'm so thrilled to hear that a product of our special employment program has come around to help Civicorps. And so for all of those reasons, our partnership is so special. And that award, it is engraved, and it took so much care, and I really appreciate, on behalf of the board, everything that Civicorps has contributed to our community. And so here's to another 40 years of our partnership. Thank you for honoring us with our role in your success.
Yes, thank you. Can we,
So we're
yeah?
gonna go which way? Okay. we'll go
Oh,
this way.
okay, great. Thank you for allowing us to share this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before you leave the room, Civicorps, one, huge congratulations. When I worked at the CCC a few years ago, I then was working with Joanne Lennon at the EBCCC.
Oh, yes.
And so it's really nice to see you're here, you're growing and thriving, and I think it's a great service to the entire East Bay. Thank you.
All right,
I would like to, am I doing it? I would like to join with John and Andy and just for a moment step back in time. I remember Civicorps coming to the East Bay, and when you came over and you blossomed and bloomed over here. And I lobbied for your assistance to the city of Oakland and your contract. And further, I visited you the night of your celebration. I came before Andy, but I have been pretty much with you every step of the way. I want to congratulate you on your accomplishment and thank you for honoring us and wish you great success in the future. Thank you, thank you.
Doug? Doug? Did you have comments?
I didn't have any. I was just trying to catch your attention.
Oh, okay. All right, so that moves us on to public comment. If members of the public are online and wish to speak on agenda or non-agenda items, please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom. Madam Secretary, do we have anyone online?
We don't have anyone online at the moment for public comment. I did get an email that there may be someone online, but I don't see a hand just yet.
All right, I do have 2 speaker cards for items that are not on the agenda today. So we have Justin Young, water treatment plant concerns. Justin, you want to come up? Followed by Yvette Rivera. And as you know, you have 3 minutes for your comments. Good afternoon, Justin.
$3 billion in debt in the next 5 years. What is the reason? The increase of capital improvement projects at water treatment plants with mostly consultant support. Good afternoon, Board of Directors, General Manager Chan, EBMUD family, and fellow ratepayers. There's a concern that district is not valuing in-house knowledge. EBMUD has prided themselves in being above other water agencies, but we're slowly turning into them. Who should have more knowledge in the district on our own treatment plants? By the actions of capital improvement projects we're approving, the district is saying consultants. Did you know we are currently constructing our largest project since Folsom South Canal at Orinda Water Treatment Plant? The Orinda Water Treatment Plant project has been fully designed by consultants, not a single drawing completed by the design division. It was the opposite case for the Folsom South Canal project. Did you also know every single chemical feed system at all our treatment plants are currently being designed by consultants for millions of dollars? Chemical feed systems are one of the most basic processes of our water treatment plants. And next week, our next board meeting, they will consider a planning pre-design project for pretreatment at Walnut Creek Water Treatment Plant, which you heard about this morning in the planning committee. The district is paying millions more on these projects to these same consultants to support during construction on separate contracts. Why is this an issue? The designs aren't to district standards. The contractors aren't creating detailed designs, which result in an increased amount of change orders, which leads to increased costs during construction. 2, the cost of operations and maintenance at the district increases. District staff has to assist to design during construction to make work what we paid the design consultants to do. District also needs separate expensive contract to support these new systems. No one at district understands how these systems operate due to lack of knowledge. Do you think consultants understand our customers better than our own company? When I say customers, I don't mean fellow ratepayers, but our water treatment plant operators and maintenance staff. What are the district's metrics for success? It shouldn't be KPI that focuses on management success. Let's focus on district success with cost. I have an idea to save the district millions of dollars. We should examine how we're using consultants in the past in order to save the ratepayers money in the future. Let's find out how much the last completed design consultant and engineering support during construction project costed a water treatment plant. Let's have an unbiased third party audit the ozone replacement project at Sobrante and USL Water Treatment Plant. What are the estimates of this project? What did it actually cost district to plan design, construct, and support? The board of directors is looking for training. This is a great opportunity to learn how the district is spending money on capital improvement projects at water treatment plants. At $3 billion in debt in the next 5 years, it's the least we can do to prevent more rate increases in the coming years. Thanks for the floor.
Thank you, Justin. Our next speaker is Yvette Rivera. The topic is stopping harassment and professional conduct of lawyers.
Thank you.
3 minutes, Yvette.
I provided the email to you that I already gave to you. I sent to you yesterday. I said that now that the retaliatory mediation directive has finally been rescinded, please stop the harassment and retaliation against me. This morning, Eric Larson spoke about HR's practice of not interceding to stop unfair labor practices. It's pretty obvious. We have a department here at the district that gets a lot of money to act like they're the labor relations officer or the HR manager, but when blatant harassment and retaliation happen, they stand back and do nothing. In the case of the mandatory mediation, as you know, and the public doesn't, the union gave a directive to the district to basically stop the harassment and retaliation. The district didn't respond. Only until Monday did I get an email saying that HR rescinded the mandatory mediation. I provided a rules of professional conduct document this morning to members, and I'll email it, and it's for lawyers. And I said this morning that the board should rescind the service award given to Craig Spencer. And I'm not saying now, but as soon as the district has to pay up the $8 million, the district should rescind that in a show of good faith to show district employees that that the board members aren't going to accept retaliation or anything else that's been proven in that court of law by Craig Spencer. There is a few paragraphs in this document that apply to all attorneys, including attorneys at EBMUD. And I'm not a lawyer, but by reading it, I could see that lawyers at the district were supposed to turn in Craig Spencer if they suspected that he was acting inappropriately or breaking any kind of civil service rules or laws. Well, that didn't happen, obviously, but there is a proceeding right now that will probably come to an end before the end of the year, and the district will have to pay, what, $300,000? Right now, it's $200,000. But when it's over, I hope the district doesn't pay his punitive damages, and I hope the district rescinds that service award to show everyone at the district that that kind of behavior isn't acceptable. I'm going to end right here by saying you received the winner's report and the SURE report last board meeting. It was ugly. The SURE report basically told you how horrible things were. Nothing has changed, and I provided you documents that you can review to compare to documents that you should ask Mr. Derry Moten to update so that you can compare them. Thank you, I yield.
Thank you, Yvette. That moves us on to,
No
our
further.
Secretary, no further
public comment.
All right. That moves us on to the consent calendar. Items 1 through 10.
I'll move, well, I'd like to remove item 4, that's all, for discussion.
All right.
I'll move the rest of the items.
Do we have a second?
4.
4.
I'm pretty sure it was 4. Let me find it again.
And Doug moved all except 4.
Fields EAM.
Let me,
All except 4.
Director Lenny moved.
Yes.
And who's second?
Bill. If there's no discussion, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, item 4, John.
Thank you. I'm trying to find it on my iPad here. I guess it's the 20 numbers. I will support this. I support the contract that we're looking at. But I guess my question,
Do you want this, John?
no, I think I've got it here now. Thank you very much, April. My little bit of concern was, excuse me, under the summary, staff will engage in requirements, specifications, and testing of the prototyped processes to ensure the district understands the Maximo solution prior to full-scale implementation. Now, the contract calls for $935,000 plus approval of the contract. Is that time that's going to be spent testing included the 935, or are we going to have somebody coming back to the board saying, well, we need more money now because of the testing that went on and we found that it has to be different or whatever else. I just want to make sure that we're not, are we capping at 935? Or may that change based on the engaging in requirement, specification, and testing?
Yeah, let me try to answer it, and I don't know if it's Orlando maybe will provide some additional information. So, you know, the CMS system it's a very large project. It's used by many hundreds of people at EBMUD. The Maximo solution, just so the board is aware, is already used at the wastewater department, but not on the water side. We have, as you're aware, many assets, you know, pipelines that we call linear assets and the pumping plants that are vertical assets. And we want to make sure that before we move forward with this, that we understand what those workflows will be to make sure that the solution actually works for the people that are out there in the field. So the money that's going to be spent, my understanding is this is what is going to be necessary for us to, you know, it's called prototyping, but really to develop solutions. So this effort is going to lead into another contract that will then come to the board for the full-scale implementation of this project.
So it may not necessarily be Fields EAM that gets the next contract?
No, this is the contractor.
Okay, I know that for the 935, but when they're doing the testing and process requirement specifications, is that going to lead to a new contract, or is it?
This is the integrator that we would be bringing to the board for approval if we, you know, if we move forward with this project. That is a selected integrator with the Maximo solution.
Okay, so the board will not be looking at future increases, future BD1s on this?
There will be, again, after this phase.
Okay.
Once we go to an actual implementation, we would have to bring another contract to the board.
Okay, and how far down the road might that be?
Orlando, do you want to answer that one?
Thank you, General Manager Chan. So this is the first phase in bringing a system that many other water agencies are using for their work management systems. We're testing out 2 specific processes to make sure they work for our field workers especially. And so the question of testing, yes, this amount right here will include all the testing. Fields will help supplement that. Our people will be using the system day in and day out to make sure it's working as expected, and we'll iterate until it works to what we need. If that goes well, let's say this contract right now is for up to 2 years. If this goes well, then we will go and create the entire full specification of all the other work management systems. So roughly 2 to 3 years later, we will be coming back to the board.
That's what I wanted to know.
Okay.
I'll move the item.
Thank you.
We have a motion from John, a second from Bill Patterson, Vice President Patterson. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, it's unanimous.
President McIntosh, we have one hand for public comment.
All right, is this online?
It's online.
All right.
Lana Coleman, you should be able to unmute your mic.
Yeah, can you unmute my phone instead so I don't have the feedback?
One moment.
Thank you.
Phone number ending in 1204. You should be able to unmute your phone. Are you able to unmute your phone? Okay.
Is she gone?
No, there it is. Hello? Okay. We can hear you on the
Okay,
phone, but there is feedback.
Yes, so you can hear me now, correct?
Yes, and your 3 minutes will start now.
Thank you. I'm Lana Coleman. I'm Mrs. John Coleman, as most of you know. Within the last week, I sent a message to the members of the board that I was withdrawing my appeal of the court decision. I've spent 2 years of my life fighting for what is true and right with East Bay Mud unsuccessfully. I hadn't planned to speak today, but the topics around ethics and retirement have been pervasive through your meetings today, which made me feel the need to speak. You have problems in both areas. We were not treated ethically. Lisa Sarami lied. Derek McDonald did not follow the retirement ordinance, nor did other managers. That needs to be in your ethics policies, that they're required to follow an ordinance. And on retirement, you've heard it. You now have the Contra Costa Water District document. If that document existed at East Bay Mud, you would have saved a lot of money. We'd have saved a lot of money, a lot of heartache, a lot of disruption to our lives and our health. Why is it that you can't just embrace change and say that we need this? You're always going to put it in a memo or study it. I really hope somebody will say, we need a document like this so that we don't have a problem like the Colemans had any other employee ever again. At present, there's just one word in your retirement ordinance, enters. One word about reciprocity not applying if there's an overlapping service. One word that the judge said, because East Bay Mud was there to interpret it one way, he would go with that, but it really could be interpreted either way. You need to change that. You need to fix this. I will not go away and let other people experience at your hands what I did. Thank you.
We have no other hands for public comment.
All right. That moves us to determination and discussion. The first item on the agenda is item 11, legislative update. And just for a quick update, this was on our agenda for Ledge HR this morning, but we ran out of time. So we did not hear it, and therefore we do not have a recommendation to the full board. Come on up, Kathy. Welcome, Eric.
Okay. So good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you, President McIntosh and members of the board, and Happy New Year. So I'm going to present on the federal initiatives. I should correct myself. We have changed the name. These are no longer initiatives. We're calling them federal priorities and then the state legislative priorities. So it's just a name change, but the construct is the same. So I will present on the federal priorities, and then Eric will come up and pull out his magic 8-ball and tell you whether or not we're going to come up with a spending plan. What he doesn't know is I replaced that little plastic piece in the middle that just says perhaps or uncertain. So that's going to be probably a large part of his message. So let's dive into the federal priorities. So essentially, basically, we think that Congress, is going to continue, despite sort of its inability to possibly even move any legislation this year. There may be some bright spots, but they'll continue to have discussions on sort of 3 priority areas that have a nexus with the district. And those are climate change resiliency, infrastructure and other funding, water quality, and then, of course, water supply reliability and natural resources protection as they continue to deal with issues surrounding the effects of climate change. So focusing in on climate change resiliency, in 2024, though, like I said, we don't anticipate any kind of expansion of climate laws because of the divided Congress, we do think that there may be some conversations around topics on fisheries and infrastructure, forest and watershed health, wildfire prevention and response, renewable energy, workforce transition and development, and then also water supply reliability and resilience depending on what, the weather conditions are like and what the snowpack is across the West and in California. So California continues to receive funding through the federal government, and in particular from the Inflation Reduction Act that was signed into law that was historic, and provides significant funding to kind of address these climate impacts. And it is a way of sort of leveraging and building on California's leadership on climate, and prioritizes that funding support for drought and wildfire resiliency. It also has provisions in there to provide assistance to lower household energy costs, and also to assist with the costs of transitioning to zero-emission vehicles. So a lot of these priorities are consistent with the district's priorities around in our climate action plan, which we're going through an update on that, which is going to be coming back to the board. So we may also see Congress or the Biden administration consider, again, ways to sort of address workforce development and workforce transition issues in the context of climate change and the transition to a carbon-neutral economy. That was of interest to Congressman DeSaulnier in the past. It may continue to be a topic of discussion going forward. So we will continue to focus on this area and work with our delegation and the administration and other relevant congressional committees and stakeholders, and we will monitor the programmatic funding opportunities consistent with our climate action plan and share that, with staff at the district so they can take advantage of those. We'll identify potential opportunities to advance the district's interest in the forestry issues, in particular in watershed health and wildfire prevention and response, and do that through our involvement in UMRA. And then we'll continue, again, to communicate about the opportunities in the water and the wastewater sector as they look at the workforce transition issues as we move to a carbon-free economy. So those are kind of the priority areas where we'll continue to focus and monitor the opportunities. So any questions there on that one?
Looks
Now
like.
can we hear Eric's presentation?
Okay. Eric will add a
Saving
lot.
that energy.
Eric will add a lot more color. I'm always glad that I get to go before him and then he goes and then I go after. Okay, so moving along into infrastructure and other funding assistance. So looking at this, second year of the 118th Congress, I think the greatest opportunity for us is to look at the reauthorization of the Army Corps of Engineers Water Resources Development Act, which is known as WRDA, the acronym that we use. It has to be enacted every 2 years, and so both the Senate and the House last year held hearings on WRDA reauthorization, and they're working on their bills. So we, in the past, this was back, 2 positions before me, Randy back in 2007 had secured an authorization for up to $25 million for the district under WRDA to support investments in recycled water treatment facilities within our service area. And we have taken advantage of that authorization when they started back up doing earmarks. A couple of years ago, we drew down on that authorization and secured $3 million through a congressionally directed spending as part of the fiscal year 2022 spending bill package, and that was for the East Bay Shore Recycled Water Project. We've submitted another request for this budget year, and that is for $2.5 million, and that would be in the FY 2023 spending package, and I'm going to let Eric talk about that. What are the prospects for that? Hope springs eternal here, that they won't cut out those earmarks, if you will, and that we'll be successful again in pulling that down. But we are also considering and moving forward with trying to actually expand that authorization from $25 million up to $45 million. So we're requesting an additional $20 million authorization under the Act so we can continue to expand our recycled water investments in partnership and working with the Corps. So you have to do these with the Corps through these public partnership agreements, which was one of the topics of one of the hearings. So in addition to WRDA, there is interest in Congress, and particularly coming from the Senate and from Senator Padilla, in trying to establish a permanent water rate assistance program for low-income households for water and wastewater service. That said, it's unclear right now because of the spending issues of how they would fund that. But they are now beginning to talk about doing this. The existing LIWAP program, which was really rolled out under COVID, under the pandemic, is at a pilot project. It was rolled out in California in June 2022. And we have been participating in that, through local community-based organizations. But it's set to expire in 2024. We think there may be some money left in it, and looking at sort of a reauthorization and extension, creating a permanent program is something that we could be supportive of, but we really need to look and study the bill. Others are starting to come out and comment on that, so that's something we see moving forward this coming year. So we'll continue, again, to communicate to our congressional delegation the importance, of EBMUD projects and priorities and these issues around affordability and how these programs really benefit our ratepayers and the district. We will advance, opportunities to fund and see what they look like for water and wastewater infrastructure funding needs via any of these federal funding opportunities. But like I said, the most obvious one right now is water reauthorization, and we will continue to pursue congressionally directed spending until that ends, or seek some other funding from existing authorities that we have in various bills. So we also will, as I mentioned, we'll continue to monitor these discussions around, a permanent low-income ratepayer assistance program and actually weigh in, because our program is actually viewed as a model, and we've had conversations with Senator Padilla's office already about how our program works, and so we'll continue to participate in those discussions, with the Senator's office and with our delegation, as well as with other stakeholders. So any questions about infrastructure and other federal funding?
Yeah, just a comment. I know Eric's going to make his presentation. Several of these climate change resiliency, water quality, water supply reliability, natural resources, those are programs that also impact a lot of our UMRA partners. I would like to see a presentation made at the UMRA meeting on January 26th up at Pardee about that, so they're aware of what we're doing and maybe how they can provide. They may not agree on everything, that's fine, but they know what we're doing, and they may want to weigh in and be supportive of what we're doing in some of those areas, because I know their congressperson is Mr. McClintock, who doesn't believe in earmarks at all. But, I mean, they have some political weight that they could lend in DC, perhaps, and certainly in Sacramento. So hopefully we'll have a presentation at the UMRA meeting on January 26th.
Okay. Well, I've made note of that, and we'll be in touch with UMRA and see if that date works for them.
That's our next board meeting.
That's your next board meeting, okay. And you're asking us to come and give the presentation
Yes.
to them? Okay. Okay.
Yeah, on the affordability front at the congressional level, it's great to hear that we're talking to Padilla's office. In a very unlikely event that Congress actually does something on this, would it provide any cover for us or, otherwise how does it relate to Prop 218? If we could expand our CAP program in a way that really got us to all of eligible customers, we know that we don't have the non-rate revenue to cover that. But if there's a federal, maybe this is just wishful thinking and I should shut up, but if there were a federal, statute, would it preempt? How would it relate to state, or would it not?
So I don't think it would run afoul of Prop 218 because it's separate. It's separate federal funding that's coming through. And right now, I think what's unknown is that what Senator Padilla is envisioning is, rather than going through Health and Human Services, how the pilot program is being implemented, is he's proposing, and his concept is that it would run through US EPA, which the sister to that would be the State Water Resources Control Board. So we don't know yet whether it would affect and change the implementation in California, or if it would continue to run through our Department of Community Services and Development, I forget the actual name of the department, and then continue to work through the community-based organizations. But either way, it's separate. Think of them as separate buckets of money. So it would be an enhancement, which it is today.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to jump onto water quality. So Water quality is a kind of a perennial issue. Congress and the Biden administration continue to focus on it. PFAS in drinking water supplies and also wastewater discharges and biosolids has been a topic of, hearings and discussions. So US EPA, as you know, is very focused on the implementation of the PFAS strategic roadmap, and they gave an update on that this past year. They proposed issuing drinking water standards, for 6 PFAS compounds. And then EPA is also considering designating PFAS as a hazardous substance under the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, which is a mouthful, which is CERCLA, which is also Superfund. So we have 3 names for that act. But essentially when Congress held their hearing on PFAS, it was trying to consider legislation to, designate PFAS as a hazardous substance under CERCLA, and kind of the breadth, and hearing what would be the breadth and the extent of such a designation, what are source control opportunities, and any appropriate types of exemptions from liability. So this is something that we, continue to monitor. There will continue to be discussions on PFAS. There also could be discussions around other contaminants of emerging concern or other pollution prevention measures that have the potential to impact the district and our wastewater operations. And this whole idea, of PFAS and biosolids, were it to be designated a hazardous waste, this could impact our wastewater operations and create potential liability for the district. We'd really have to understand what they intend to do in any legislation. But again, would that move forward this year? Would it wait till the lame duck session? Those are questions we just don't know. Next steps, so on this front, we'll continue to monitor the development of any water quality legislation or policies at the federal level, and then make sure that our interests are effectively communicated. We'll work through the industry associations that are very active in this area to ensure appropriate standards are established under the Safe Drinking Water Act and the Clean Water Act and CERCLA. We'll support any efforts to eliminate PFAS, including establishing, producer responsibility and maintaining our policy around sort of the polluter pays principle for cleanup under CERCLA. And then we will seek expanded, assistance for, PFAS treatment in the water and the wastewater sectors. So those will be our priorities in the coming year. Any questions about those issues? Okay. And then lastly, water supply reliability and natural resources protection. This is a broad umbrella, topic. So water resources issues, will continue to be topics of discussion in the second half of this 118th session. There is some talk of Western water legislation, what that looks like. It could be something that incorporates provisions of the STREAM Act, which was the Feinstein bill that we brought you last year that was looking at sort of reauthorization of the WIN Act and some of the federal funding programs for various projects. It could be part of that. There are new biological opinions that are expected to come out governing the projects. There could be an attempt, to look at how to address some of those provisions, whether they're liked or not. That could be in legislation. So it could affect CVP operations and allocations, water supply reliability and resilience, including future drought response. I think they're probably going to be looking at the Colorado River and the needs there. There could be provisions that deal with fishery and habitat restoration and protection, and then actions also related potentially to the implementation of the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan, because the federal contractors have an obligation under that plan as well. So we will continue to monitor and communicate our interests. One, to protect the McCollumney River water supplies and preserve the district's access to water transfers and CVP contract water. We will continue to advocate and seek to protect the McCollumney River fishery. We had such a great year in terms of historic returns and a great story to tell. And so we will include, working to ensure that if there's any policies or programs or revisions to project or project-related operations that could affect negatively the fishery, we would really look to secure some kind of mitigation measures for those by any responsible parties. And then we would continue to work with the M&I, the municipal and industrial CVP contractors, to safeguard, our CVP policies that support, the contractor's supplies, including access to adequate water supplies. And then we would also continue to seek to protect, our interests and water supply programs, including, the Freeport Regional Water Project. So that's a lot to digest. So any questions about this last category?
Marguerite.
Well, I have a question actually back on PFAS, and Eric might be better equipped to answer, but do we have feelers with other environmental organizations on the PFAS Superfund designation issue in terms of them understanding the misplacement of that, of what ends up happening if we end up getting named as a polluter, or?
There was a hearing and there was a panel where many of them were present, and they have obviously been weighing in, but I'll let Eric answer some of this, because I know you've talked to some of those groups.
So I think the problem or the challenge with resolving this issue of PFAS liability for public agencies really resides in, is it precedent setting?
Eric,
The
can you step
environmental
to the right?
community has consistently,
Eric, can you step closer to Kathy?
Here, let me get out of your way so you can.
Yeah.
be in the
okay,
center.
I'm sorry. So the environmental community, and I'll put labels on it, the Environmental Working Group and NRDC and Southern Environmental Law Center probably are the lead organizations in articulating the concerns about PFAS liability across the board, not just for the public water sector. They maintain that we don't want to have a precedent-setting situation of providing on a chemical-by-chemical basis an exemption to Superfund liability. That's really what the debate is over right now. How that gets resolved remains to be seen. And this is a little bit of my presentation, so spoiler alert.
Well, you could save it, I mean.
No, but I think it's the best way to say it is, we're in the classic example of a wicked policy-making situation, which is if Congress doesn't do anything to provide some kind of protection, not exemption, protection to public water agencies, for example, that do the right thing, that are in compliance with the statutory obligations of the Safe Drinking Water Act, for example. If nothing happens, then the agency, EPA's designation of chemicals like PFAS as hazardous substances under Superfund opens up a Pandora's box of real challenges on frivolous litigation. So that's what we're faced with right now.
Thank you, Eric.
Okay, so that wraps up the presentation on the federal priorities, and I'm going to stay here because I'm going to turn it over to Eric to give an update on sort of the federal activities. But any more questions on this one? And
I thought you were going to do both state and federal.
so I'll come back after Eric presents, because I think it ties into the federal priorities,
right.
and then I'll present the state
Okay.
priorities. So, and then I presume you want to then take an action on both of them together?
Yes.
Okay, all right, so I'll step aside and let Eric proceed.
Thank you, Kathy. So first off,
Welcome, Eric.
First off, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
And President McIntosh and Vice President Patterson, congratulations. So I'm going to give you a presentation. Now, spoiler alert number 2, there are no cartoons because there's nothing funny going on in Washington in the past year.
There's always something funny going on in
Give us
Washington.
one moment, Eric. We're gonna,
Fishy, maybe.
give us one moment. We're
Fishy,
gonna
not funny.
organize the screen. And give us one moment. We'll organize the screen, and then you'll be able to advance your slides.
Okay, well, this is going on. Let me just sort of an introduction say
You ready?
that the last year clearly shattered all political expectations or assumptions. And I'll get into that in a second.
You're ready?
Good to go?
Mhm.
Okay,
Click
good.
one time, and then you'll be able to advance.
Oh, excellent. So I'm going to give you an overview, but I want to stress, as I said, it shattered all expectations. And then I'm going to turn to sort of the second session that Kathy sort of gave a overview of what the specifics about the issues that we'll be pursuing on behalf of the district in Washington. And then after that, I'll give you some predictions that you can then, hopefully in another 6 or 8 months, you'll say, geez, Eric, you were a genius, you're right, and not, oh, you really called it wrong. So, a couple of things. First of all, the political climate in the last cycle. It's akin to a Category 5 hurricane complemented by a wildfire. I don't think anybody expected that we would have the year that we had in Washington. You know, the fact of the matter was, in the House, it was just, well, members of Congress literally were describing it as a expletive show, and in public. And it really was a terrible situation. Nobody was working with anybody. What did get done was done at sort of the 11th hour, and I'll get into that in this continuing resolutions. But in the Senate, it was a little bit different. Even though the Senate wasn't, you know, the Senate's always knocked for being the graveyard for legislation to die. But the Senate worked on a bipartisan basis to come up with some legislation that never went anywhere in the House. They moved their appropriations bills out of the committee in conformance with the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which preserved essentially current year funding as part of the agreement on the debt ceiling limit so that programs weren't going to be slashed. And I think the one thing that sort of got to the sort of nub of the issue of what went on last year was the speaker situation, and that, you know, Kevin McCarthy took 15 votes to become speaker and then lasted 9 months. And sort of a little trivia piece of information here, he had the shortest tenure of speaker in the House of Representatives in the past 100 years. And if you go back to the beginning of time, he was number 3 in the roster of the shortest tenures. The number 1 was a fellow by the name of Pomeroy. He lasted 1 day, but that's because he was appointed speaker in the 1800s on the last day of the Congress. I have no idea why he got 1 day's duty, but he did. And then Michael Kerr, he lasted 258 days in the 1800s. The only reason he didn't last longer than that is he died in office. So Kevin McCarthy didn't die in office, but he had a political death, and that was that. And his downfall, which I think, you know, essentially encapsulates why the world was so upside down in Congress last year, was the budget and the Fiscal Responsibility Act. As you recall, he made a deal with President Biden and the Senate Republicans and Democrats to essentially put in place spending levels across the board for the next 2 budget cycles. That's the one we're technically in right now, fiscal year 24, and then fiscal year 25. Unfortunately for McCarthy, and this is going to be playing out in the next year, and I'll get to that with Speaker Johnson now, you know, when you have 4 votes in your majority, unless you're Speaker Nancy Pelosi or former Speaker Nancy Pelosi or current Speaker Hakeem Jeffries from New York, where they have incredible discipline and unity within the Democratic caucus to vote together, you can't get anything done. And in the case of McCarthy, you know, he had a 4-vote margin, and he had 34 members of the House Freedom Caucus who just really wanted to see him not be successful on the budget front. So as you saw it play out, Representative Matt Gaetz and others essentially brought the speaker down due to the deal that McCarthy cut to become speaker, which is unprecedented nature of one member being able to call for the vacancy of the speaker and have a vote. And you all saw that play out in the sort of real time, NBC, CNN, MSNBC, and God forbid, Fox News. So I think, you know, the fact of the matter is what you saw was that the budget and the Fiscal Responsibility Act captured why Congress didn't work well. There's not a working majority that can get things done. So the disruptions continued. The congressional leadership was disrupted, as I said. And then finally, because we couldn't get a final spending bill done in 23, because fiscal year 24 began on October 1st of 23, we're on a continuing resolution. that has a direct impact upon the district and other organizations that have what we call community project funding assistance. And so the district's funding that was requested for the water recycling project by Representative Barbara Lee remains hanging in the balance because they could not do a final spending bill for FY '24 by October 1. We're under a continuing resolution now, and I'm going to turn to that in a second, but I'll tell you right now that everybody wants to get a budget done. And given the news of the past weekend, that they have what we call top-line numbers, and I'll get to that in a second, it is, I'm not going to say it's really promising, but at least there's an opportunity to do final spending bills that would then provide for passage and enactment of congressionally directed or community project funding, including the district's funding for the water recycling project. So in summation, 23 was basically a circling fire squad based on the budget debate, and that dictated why we didn't really get much done. And I would also say, if you wanted some data on why nothing got done or how you know nothing got done, in 23, only 27 bills became law. 31 passed the House. Most of them were postal naming bills, things that, make the world go round. By comparison, in 22, we had 549 bills pass the House, 248 were enacted. So the last year of the first session of the 108th Congress was probably the least productive Congress in decades. And again, all because of that 4-vote majority. That's really what it comes down to. So, turning attention to the second session of Congress. Let's see if this works. All right. We've got a whole host of key issues. These issues that we see happening are tied directly to the issues that Kathy gave to you as what next year looks like from an EBMUD perspective. Second session is always a do or die session. In Washington, the second session, when it concludes, all the legislation evaporates that hasn't been acted on. It has to be redone all over again in the next Congress. So this year is going to be especially challenging to get things done. Why? Well, we now not only have a different majority in the House, we're down to basically one vote effectively in the Republican majority. I say that because we have a member that, first we had 4 votes, recall, majority. We had a member announce that he was going to become a president of a college in Ohio in February, so he's leaving. That's 3 votes now. Steve Scalise, who is the number 2 member of the House majority, he unfortunately has blood cancer. He is in the process of leaving Congress for at least 6 weeks, I think, to take stem cell therapy. So now we're down to 2 votes. And since we have a couple of other members that may say, hey, it's that attractive offer to be a president of a university or a think tank, you could see another member leaving town, or God forbid, another illness or something. So we are basically looking at a working one vote majority in the House of Representatives. So that is going to color everything that's going to happen with respect to legislative action. So now that I've painted this real bleak picture of what the outlook is, and oh, by the way, everything that's going to get done, or the noise and the smoke that we're going to see coming out of Washington, it won't most likely be resolved until a lame duck session. And the lame duck session really will be dictated by who wins the presidency. Does the House flip? How big a margin, I think you can say, how big a margin do the Senate Republicans pick up in sort of a takeover of the Senate? Is it 1 vote, 2 votes, 3 votes? It almost seems 100% certain that the Senate could flip just because of the way the voting trends look in the red states that are occupied by a Democratic senator right now. So when we look at what the issues are, first, appropriations and community project funding will continue. So we'll get a deal hopefully cut on the FY24 spending bill no later than the end of March. I say that because we now have the top line numbers that I mentioned that were put out last couple of days, which dictate overall spending for defense and non-defense spending programs across the government. The funding decisions have to be made by January 19th for a handful of federal agencies, including the Energy and Water Appropriations Bill, which provides funding for the Bureau of Reclamation and the Corps of Engineers. That deadline can't be met. 10 days from now is not enough time for the House and Senate to put a bill together and physically send it over to the White House for signing into law. So what does that mean? We have a second deadline, February 2nd, which includes EPA spending bills and interior spending bills. That has to be done by February 2nd. All things being equal, that won't happen probably. So what will go on is probably the next week or so, there'll be trial balloons floated that they say in Congress, the leadership, we need to do an extension of continuing resolution. Let's just push it all the way past February 2nd. Let's go into March and then get a final bill done then. If they don't do that, if they say, hey, we're going to shut the government down on January 19th, it'll probably shut down for a couple of days, cooler heads will prevail, they'll put together a package, continuing resolution gets pushed through again. If they again fail in March to put something together, I think they just put up a flag of surrender and say, let's just do a year-long CR because continuing resolution, because we're almost into October for all intents and purposes. We've got the election season really going into high gear, so at the end of the day, we'll go to a continuing resolution. If that happens, the bad news is it's highly unlikely the community projects, including the districts, would be funded because there's a prohibition on funding new starts and earmarks in continuing resolutions. There's nothing we can do about that. But the other thing that goes on in this sort of scenario, if they adhere to the Fiscal Responsibility Act approach, that required a 1% across the board spending reduction on all domestic and defense spending beyond what the CR says. The reason that's important is 1% doesn't seem like a lot of money when you're talking about trillions of dollars of federal spending. But at the end of the day, we are now basically, if we're in March, April timeframe, we're into 8-9 months of the fiscal year, which means for every day that we didn't get a deal cut going into the new fiscal year, the reductions that have to be made increase almost geometrically because the spending was based on a funding level that it was way higher than what Congress intended originally. So there is this automatic increase that happens when each day passes and you don't get a spending deal for the current spending cycle, FY24. So bottom line, we're looking at maybe a 10% spending cut across the board if in fact they don't cut a deal in March or April timeframe. And one last thing, make it even more fun, the spending cuts would be administered through what we call a sequestration by the White House. So the White House will draw up cuts to programs and then send them to Congress. And then Congress has another, what we say, bite at the apple to say yay or nay, we approve or disapprove of the requested spending cuts. So they could take money out of one program more than, say, 1 to 10% and impose a higher cut to another program. So I think, what you're going to see if that scenario unfolds is there's going to be a huge amount of advocacy going on by trade associations to protect things like the State Revolving Loan Fund program, like the Water Smart program at the Interior Department. So fasten your seatbelts. Anybody who tells you they know what's going to happen is lying to you, or they've been smoking something, because nobody knows what's happening. It's really a true ball of confusion. And if only because, again, we're down to sort of one vote majorities. And at the end of the day, we could see Speaker Johnson being challenged again by the House Freedom Caucus. So that's where we are there. Water Resources Development Act, as Kathy said, that's going to be something that has to be done. It's a bipartisan bill. I'm very optimistic that'll get done. We'll see a lot of efforts going forward in the next 2 to 3 months in both the House and Senate to move it forward out of the committee. WRDA is always the last bill that gets out of Congress. WRDA also could become the vehicle to attach other must-pass legislation that might not make it on its own given the nature of Congress. Leads us into the Western Water legislation, the sad passing of Senator Dianne Feinstein means that California doesn't have that real loud support of seniority for California water legislation. But the good news is Senator Padilla got himself appointed to the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, and he sits on the Environment and Public Works Committee. This hasn't happened in ages for California. We have a member who is smart, committed to water and water supply issues and resiliency issues on both the key committees in the Senate that will develop legislation. So I'm encouraged that he is there, that he will be focusing on water legislation and focusing on WRDA. And then we jump into low-income ratepayer assistance. That's in the Committee on Environment and Public Works, where he is a senior member and a subcommittee chairman of the Clean Water Subcommittee. So he's got the ability to get things done for California. So I'm encouraged. And then finally, PFAS Superfund liability. I think at the end of the day, going back to Director Young's question, this is really a tough one because Superfund was always envisioned as a law to clean up abandoned hazardous waste sites. And that's what its purpose was for. And it was designed where you couldn't find a potentially responsible party. So this is what this debate is all about. The EPA is using Superfund in a unique way, which is taking a chemical concern and designating it as a hazardous substance and using Superfund to come in and do the job of cleaning up in the course of finding a site that doesn't have potentially responsible parties, or lastly, has an industry responsible party that is dragging things out and won't sit down and cut a deal to clean it up. So this is what the debate's about. I think we were supposed to have PFAS liability language out of the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works 6 or 8 months ago. It hasn't happened. Why? Because again, the narrow majorities, 51-50 in the Senate, Democratic control, that mirrors itself on the Committee on Environment and Public Works. All the Senate Republicans on the committee are lined up saying, if we're gonna do a bipartisan bill on PFAS, we've gotta deal with this liability issue because we're watching legitimate concerns being voiced on how you deal with public agencies that are trying to protect public health, and industry could come in and try and tag a utility to be part of a cleanup effort. And even if you're not responsible, you have to expend legal resources to protect your ratepayers from that frivolous litigation. So that's what it's all about. And I don't think we're going to see resolution of that until much later in the year. We may see legislation come out of the Committee on Environment and Public Works the next 2 months, and then we'll have an opportunity to comment on it and give feedback. But these are the issues I see from a key sort of legislative perspective for the second session. And again, not moving. Anyway, again, all of what I've said, quite frankly, is not going to be resolved in long term until the lame duck. And depending on who wins the White House and depending on who wins the House of Representatives, that will dictate whether we have a really productive lame duck session of like clearing the decks of all the unfinished business, or everybody goes home and says, well, we got new management in the executive branch, or we have new management in the House of Representatives. We're not going to do anything until next cycle of Congress. So the political outlook, 1 to 2 vote House majority will impact everything in the House of Representatives. The Senate, as has been the case in the last 6 to 8 months, will dictate the legislative process and progress of what's going to happen. I said the November elections will influence the agenda. I think what you are going to see is expedited federal infrastructure funding. We're going into the last 2 years of the Infrastructure Jobs Act. And I think that the White House has made it clear that they want to be able, in the next several months, to show that there is actual construction going forward in the infrastructure field, not just that they passed a law and it's got trillions of dollars worth of assistance for infrastructure across the board, from water to wastewater to transportation, you name it. And then, as I said, election determines the lame duck session productivity. So it's going to be a wild ride, but I am ultimately optimistic that we will have WRDA we will get an appropriations bill done. And hope, and unless I'm wrong, I told you, anybody who knows what they're saying and predicting is crazy, but I'm gonna do a prediction. I think we'll get a fiscal year '24 spending bill at the end of the day. And if that's the case, the community project assistance that's in the various bills will be preserved because they can do that. So, President McDonough, I'll end right there.
So John had a
I
question.
thought you were coming to an end, Eric. Boy, talk about a Debbie Downer. Couldn't have been, this is one of the worst reports we've had, not the presentation, but really where we are and where we're heading. And that's another reason I really like the cartoons, the levity, because right now we need that levity with what we're dealing with. Having said that, I mean, that we're in bad shape. Didn't Mr. Johnson recently proposed to do what Kevin McCarthy did? They caused Kevin McCarthy to be ousted in terms of a spending bill?
Yeah, he did. He did. And this is why everybody is right now holding their breath to see what the,
Freedom Caucus?
yeah, the Freedom Caucus does. Does it trigger the moderate Republicans that could probably fit within a broom closet at this point in the House? What they do? I think this, ultimately, the statement is Hakeem Jeffries and the Democrats in the House really hold the key to whether Mike Johnson stays in power or not, because they have the votes to keep him in the speakership if they want to vote against a vacating of the chair. They also have the votes to team up with those Republicans in the House that would vote for a budget deal. So that's why I'm optimistic that we'll get something, even if Mike Johnson runs into a brick wall called the House Freedom Caucus.
Boy, isn't that great news?
Doug?
So, Eric, if I get you right, we're operating right now without a budget that's been passed. We're working on continuing resolutions. Is it possible just to kind of keep going with continuing resolutions and never pass a budget per se?
It's
Is that what you're
possible.
kind of saying is
Yeah.
gonna happen, or?
It's possible, we could find ourselves in a situation in March where they just throw up their hands and they say, we're done. We're tired. We can see, we're like on the road to nowhere. We just keep doing the same thing over and over and over, which is go to the precipice of a government shutdown, and then somebody says, we can't do that, and they pass a CR. So I could see them passing a year, what's left of the year, a year-long CR to get out of this cycle of just doing one after another CR. And then beginning the FY '25 budget process, which should start in the first Monday of February when the president sends his budget to Congress. But then they start doing that in March timeframe, and then, nothing happens until the lame duck session. So we'll have a CR October 1 of '24 going into November, December.
Because the budget is supposed to be passed October 1. or
Right.
by October 1.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Well, dreams can come true.
Yeah.
Was that Margarita?
Not in DC.
I'll, in the interest of time, I will pass.
Bill, did you have any?
No. I was following this because I think Eric is on tune with where they are. At some point, though, with all the stuff going on the worldwide horizon, we're going to get some pressure to do some things internally to hold us together. Because we've been supporting what's going on worldwide. And so those two things have to come together. Otherwise, we will go down, they will go down, and the parties that we don't want going forward worldwide will go up. That's what I'm saying. So we got to balance that, and they have to come to reckoning with it. They have the responsibility. you see, we're also in the dilemma of during the worst time in history for some of our people, the prices were rising, you know, lodging, just housing, everything, every category you can point to. I think that's why Biden threw in the extra $50 for people on Social Security, because it didn't rise to the level of assisting those folk. And the government services that were being given to them were costing them more. See, in a nutshell, I'm saying that's the other front that we have to look at and balance. Thank you, Eric.
Well, thank you. And I'll say one last thing. I know I went on too long, but you sort of spurred a thought. One thing that doesn't directly impact East Bay MUD, at least right now, is there is, as of today, the prospect of a tax bill coming together because there's a deadline of filing taxes for this past year. And one of the things that may come out of it is some child tax credit assistance long-term as a result of extending some of the research and development investment type tax credits that are expiring. So, sometimes deadlines are what are necessary to get things done.
Andy?
Yeah, I did see on the news that the Congress would be under a very extreme timed pressure to draft and mark up up to 12 appropriations bills in all of the requisite detail before the very shortly upcoming deadlines to be able to accomplish that task. So it seems like some form of continuing resolution is very likely. And it's hard to get that magic 8 ball to understand what is really going to happen. So I appreciate your hard work in trying to manage a lot of unpredictable outcomes and just make sure that our interests are well known and represented. I'm noticing one thing that, thinking about where we sat here a year ago, we were reeling from the climate-induced impacts of nutrients in our bay, and how that nutrient load that we are a major contributor to caused a biological impact that I view as an adaptation issue, but also something that we take great responsibility in managing. Now, it turns out that we have been managing that, at least in the short term. I'm wondering is that the reason why we're not seeing nutrient issues support for adaptation on our list here, or am I missing it within climate change resiliency? Are we still studying it before we really start an education program? What's our current view of how we're educating the Congress on adaptation issues with a view towards support for that type of infrastructure?
Yeah, Director Katz, I appreciate you bringing that up. We had internal discussions about that because in the past we had reflected, nutrient discussions. I think we actually have a tour scheduled on Thursday for myself and my staff to meet with the wastewater operations and actually learn more about the pilot project and where we're going. I have had conversations with my counterparts at some of the other agencies that are contributors to nutrients to the bay. And I think we don't have a clear sense of what a strategy would look like yet. And so we just don't feel like it's ripe and pulling something together. We did have concerns on the state side that there could be legislation that was seeking to try to get us to address and move faster in addressing the nutrient issue. But we were informed by some offices that had been thinking about doing that they had been asked to hold off by doing anything right now until the water board and the regional boards kind of come out with their decision about, the new updated wastewater discharge permit and so forth. So it's still on top of mind. It's just we don't see it right now emerging as a priority because we're not there yet. And it requires funding. And as we've just been talking about, we're just not certain about the funding prospects at the moment.
Yeah, I think that making sure that we understand our technical situation locally, regionally, and how we're able to manage our state regulators, state funding opportunities before we reach out to federal for specific funding, except for very specific exceptions of close allies. I think that makes a lot of of sense. Thank you.
Again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric.
Okay.
All right.
So I know I heard earlier this morning that we had a goal to get out of here by 3 o'clock today. So I'm gonna tap dance through the state initiatives, President McIntosh and members of the board, or the state priorities. I'm gonna have to change my thinking here. So these are organized alphabetically as we have always done in the past. Your memo sort of lays them out. The focal areas that we continue to see on the state side really are around 5 areas. They're around climate change, customer assistance, diversity, equity, and inclusion, water quality, and water supply reliability and resiliency. And so on climate change, you know, the Newsom administration and this legislature have really prided themselves on showcasing their leadership on this issue. Focusing in on sort of transitioning away from fossil fuels and how to adapt to climate change. That came up, you know, in the delegation they sent to COP28. They're continuing to focus in this area. Even last year when we had a budget deficit, they maintained $52.3 billion over multiple years to make investments in this particular area. Now, this year, I am also going to be a messenger of doom and gloom. The budget, the fiscal outlook is pretty dismal. And we are looking at a $68 billion deficit with multiple years of operational deficits, which I'll talk about when I give my update after the state priority presentation. So we're really uncertain about how much of that funding will be maintained and those commitments managed as we move forward. It's still a priority for the legislature and for this governor. So I don't see them cutting it back deeply, but there will be some cuts. Or some delays in expenditures. So we're going to keep an eye on that funding. You know, some of that ties into our district goals again in the climate action plan, you know, continuing to see whether there's opportunities to support, you know, the transition to zero emission vehicles in our fleets, and then increasing the use of renewable energy from hydropower, solar, and biogas. So we see some policy discussions which started last year, which may continue this year around things like building decarbonization, infrastructure to support the transition to renewables. And then, of course, there's concerns about the impacts, you know, the cost impacts of this transition, particularly to underserved communities and those households, and issues regarding equity. So those may come up as well. Other topics may really focus around the water energy nexus. That may come forward. Again, workforce transition, which is a separate area for us that I'll talk about. Grid reliability, species adaptation, where there may be opportunities for proving access to habitat, you know, for fisheries and salmon species. Adapting to sea level rise, harmful algal blooms that occur that affect water quality, and then overall water supply resilience. So the other conversation that is on the table, which will depend on what happens on the March ballot, where the governor has a mental health bond on that ballot, there's conversations about a climate resiliency bond. There are 2 proposals, one in the Assembly and one in the Senate. We don't have positions on those bills, but we can weigh in on them through the associations and with others. They are both nearly $16 billion bonds. It's very unlikely that a bond of that magnitude will go forward with this fiscal outlook over multiple years. There's also proposals, you know, for a housing bond, a fentanyl bond, and some others. So there's a lot of moving parts right now, and we'll see whether that happens. We're going to continue to monitor the climate change, you know, discussions and evaluate any kind of legislation and particular areas where there's a direct nexus to the operations of the district and our climate action plan. And we will bring any proposals to you all for discussion and consideration. Regarding wildfire and forest resilience, you know, again, they look at that through the climate lens, so they put it into this category, and we'll continue to monitor for any policies and opportunities to support fuels reductions and wildfire mitigations, both in our service area and upcountry by working through UMRA. So that's the climate piece. Any questions about that one? Okay. And then on customer assistance, again, overall affordability, as you know, Director Patterson, you pointed out, that is a concern for this legislature and the administration. I think any proposals this year, they're unlikely to be any proposals to move forward, you know, a statewide low-income water rate assistance program for water and wastewater customers, just because the attention seems to be, you know, the feds should come up with something, and there's no funding. There's no funding to implement anything, even though there have been legislative proposals on the table. We haven't heard of anything coming forward. What happened last year, as I had reported, the legislature focused on extending the water shutoff protections to customers that are served by small water systems. There may be some legislation, cleanup legislation that comes forward to deal with some pieces in there, but we're not certain about that. And then last year, they also extended essentially the deadline for the California Water and Wastewater Arrearage Payment Program through December 31, 2022, which in your report, you see now we have applied for some of that funding, up to $37 million, wouldn't it be nice, billion, $37 million. So we'll wait to hear back from the State Water Board on that. So, but I don't envision there's going to be any more of that kind of funding to support arrearages going forward because of the fiscal outlook. And then we may see efforts to revive legislation. There was a bill introduced last year that didn't move, it really stalled. And it was really trying to ensure that low-income households have equitable access to conservation programs. We were consulted about it. We shared information on our customer assistance program and the pilot projects that we were doing. But it ended up stalling because what they were trying to do was require that water agencies carve out a certain percentage of their budget for conservation programs for low-income households. But once you do that, then you do run afoul of Prop 218. Because you're targeting a specific, population. So we were waiting to see whether or not they want to come back to the table and if they intend to do something on that front. So we'll continue to seek constructive ways to advance, the district's interests as the administration and the legislature consider ways to address the affordability issue. In particular for water and wastewater customers. We'll monitor to see if there is any kind of customer assistance legislation and engage and share information about our customer assistance program and our water conservation incentives and the pilot projects we're doing. And then again, we'll bring forward any relevant legislation, that is we believe is moving forward for the board's discussion and consideration. So any questions about that priority? Okay, moving to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So over the years, the legislature and the Newsom administration have been considering DE&I issues in several areas. But the one where we've been really focusing in on is workforce diversity and workforce development programs, and if there are ways that we can leverage state funding to enhance, our DE&I goals. So last year, I reported in the fall, CMUA had sponsored a bill that was going to create a high road utility career program for publicly owned utilities and also water utilities, but that bill was held on suspense. But at the same time, the governor issued an executive order to launch a new career education effort, basically to prepare adults and students for the workforce of what they call tomorrow. We may see legislation to implement some of the pieces of that executive order, so we're keeping an eye out for that. We may also see some discussions around ways to expand workforce development and transition programs for the oil and gas workers, which I've talked about on the federal side. It may continue to be a conversation on the state side. There was funding in the budget in 2022. There was $40 million to set up a pilot program for assisting that transition for oil and gas, displaced oil and gas workers, focusing on 3 counties. One of them was Contra Costa, the other was Kern, and was Los Angeles. And an RFP went out, and we have learned that the Contra Costa Workforce Development Board applied for some of those funds, and our staff and HR, we have been in coordination, and they have been reaching out to the Workforce Development Board to see if there's opportunities, sort of to partner to show that there are opportunities in the water and the wastewater sectors. So we'll continue, to pursue these kinds of opportunities, whether it's through funding for programs like this or trying to create incentives to assist with that transition and consistent with our DE&I strategic plan. Any questions about that one? Okay, I feel like I'm talking very fast, so slow me down if you're missing anything.
There's a lot more to say in depth about the workforce transition piece. But I think we definitely should be involved because these are very highly skilled employees who have a lot to offer the workforce, and we would be well served if, in the event that individuals with those skills become displaced, that we became their employer if they so chose to apply. I think we can do better than just a program that tries to give away some wage replacement. We can do so much better by trying to be proactive, working with the legislature, the community-based partners that are contracting with EDD and other stakeholders, and think about something that looks more like an employer retention program or an employee retention program where we're motivated to participate. We are making that transition more seamless and predictable for the worker. And there's so many details to figure out and think about. But I think I am concerned that the program that the state has piloted is just a Band-Aid on what could be more gushing later. So I think we can be part of a bigger and better solution.
Yeah, and as those conversations continue, we'll try to have a seat at the table and be part of that conversation. And we've been having internal conversations after we spoke about what that may look like. So we'll continue to see what those opportunities may be, Director Katz.
And then hopefully Ledge HR will have you back repeatedly over the year.
Yeah,
So we can continue to have these discussions.
Yes,
and
we can continue to
updates.
monitor and see where things are
Yeah.
moving. Yeah, I think, and I'll talk about this in my update, I think, it's going to be a tough year because I think all eyes are going to be on the budget and how they resolve the budget issues, and we're also in an election year. So that's going to have a lot of people campaigning, and we're going to have a massive turnover in the legislature again. So we just have to see kind of where they're focusing and what are the issues that are coming forward. So I just want to get through two more quickly. Water quality, so conversations in the legislature, we talked over the fall about, the issues regarding the PFAS legislation that was passed last year that the governor vetoed, because the governor had basically said that there really wasn't a kind of a regulatory framework, which was making it difficult to implement those bills, though they had previously passed and signed previous bills that was dealing with sort of PFAS in consumer products on a product-by-product basis. Well, we envision that something will come forward this year that looks at sort of addressing this comprehensively. The Department of Toxic Substance Control was directed to sort of come up with what that regulatory framework would look like. I don't know if those two things will align, but I envision that there will be some more legislation likely on PFAS, and we'll certainly weigh in on those issues. There may be some legislation that is dealing with microplastics in water. The State Water Board's working on regulations for microplastics in drinking water and planning to conduct a small pilot program. We're participating in that program to sort of sort out the analytical procedures and sampling protocols. And so while those efforts are underway, there may be more legislation dealing with microplastics in water that we could actively engage in if it's appropriate. So we'll continue to monitor, those discussions and any potential legislation and bring those to the board for consideration.
Does DTSC have somebody running point on the PFAS framework?
Director, I don't know the answer to that question, and we need to
Well, it's sort of a
follow
key
up on that.
question at DTSC is,
Yeah.
actually, is there somebody that's been, assigned to own
Assigned to own it, yeah.
that? Because that's kind of their MOs.
Yeah, I think, yes. And right now, we're starting to see, there's some rumblings about some intent legislation to deal with PFAS programmatically, but that's the key issue. We need to understand that. Because whatever they do, that's going to have again, if there's going to be an impact on the general fund, I think it's going to be very hard for those bills to get out. And then lastly, on water supply and reliability, so we expect the Newsom administration and the legislature to maintain their focus on water supply and resiliency in 2024, as we experiencing, these swings in precipitation. So during the fall, the Newsom administration released a progress report on the implementation of the governor's water supply strategy, and that strategy was released in 2022 specifically to take all of his water priorities and really zero in on how are they dealing with these swings in participation in these really dry, hot periods. So to generate new supplies, figure out how you accelerate, the construction of new water infrastructure and other issue areas. And so they gave a progress report on that, on sort of new supplies, focusing in on recycling and desal projects, capturing and saving more stormwater above and below ground, reducing the use of water by cities and farms. That's their whole water use efficiency regulations that are moving through the State Water Board, and improving overall water management with better data and forecasting conveyance and improved administration of water rights. So we expect they'll continue to focus in on those areas and continue to try to make progress. The big issues for us as last year, as were the water rights modernization bills. Those two bills are still active in the legislature. They're considered two-year bills. They're over in the Senate. They didn't move forward because there weren't sufficient votes to get those bills out of the Senate Water Resources and Policy Committee. AB 460 by Bauer-Cahan is the one that grants, the Water Board new interim relief powers for enforcement purposes, and AB 1337 basically clarifies the Water Board's ability to curtail water rights in any year type, when there's not enough water available under the diverter's priority. So we have been having conversations with the proponents of those bills to see if we can find a path forward. We have an oppose unless amended position. Those bills don't need to be acted on until June because they're in the second house, and we'll continue to participate in constructive conversations around whether there's a path forward and our concerns can be addressed. And then I think the other thing that may come up, in addition to water rights modernization, is the State Water Board's update of the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan. It's a priority for the Newsom administration. We are weighing in on that, as you have been informed. This effort, could also influence legislative discussions. We don't know in which direction, and so we'll continue to monitor for that. There could be discussions pertaining to the funding that's in the budget to help with the implementation of the voluntary agreements. And then there's also, there may be other policies that come up that's sort of addressing that or that we will continue to keep an eye on. And obviously, we would bring all of that back to the board for consideration if there were policy bills that were appropriate. So that, I think, completes my kind of overview of the state legislative priorities. And so combining those with the federal, I guess we're bringing these to you for action today.
Yes, and each individually. So Clifford, do we start with the federal priorities first?
Sure.
All right.
I'll move to accept the federal priorities report.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
All right. Is there any further discussion or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. We'll move to the state legislative priorities for 2024. Do we have a motion? Marguerite?
I'll second.
All right. We have a motion by Marguerite, a second. Was it by you, Andy?
We both went at the same time, so you can pick.
Okay. Andy. We have a motion and a second. If there's no further discussion, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Thank you guys so much.
You're
It was
welcome.
a lot to cover.
It is a lot. I just have a couple more updates I want to share with you very quickly. We talked about the budget. I think that's going to be a major issue and how they address that. We could see cuts. They could dip into reserves. I think they're looking at potentially that. They could delay spending. There's been talk of a billionaire's tax, but the governor has kind of on social media put the kibosh on that. I think there's some members of the
He
legislation.
needs their money.
Out there. Yeah, so, but there is $24 billion in reserves. But even with that, we have $68 billion this year, and then the next 3 years, they're projecting $30 billion operational deficits each year. So it's pretty serious. But as you know, things can swing quickly and, revenues can turn up. And so if interest rates start going down and people are investing in buying more homes and investing in the stock market, those things can turn things around very quickly. So it's uncertain what the future looks like, but it will take up attention. So I will keep updating the board, as I come back in this committee on what's happening with the budget. And the governor actually rolls out, his proposed budget for the upcoming fiscal year tomorrow. So the curtain goes up at 10:30. We'll have a better idea of what he considers his priorities, and then the negotiations will begin. The other thing is there have been leadership changes and committee changes as a result. So Speaker of the Assembly, Rivas, so he took over halfway through last year. Now he's starting his first full year. Still not clear sort of what his priorities are, and we're waiting to sort of see those come forward. But in his new capacity, he announced changes to policy committee chairs, and it was over the recess. So Jesse Gabriel, who is from Southern California, from Encino, he's replacing Phil Ting as the chair of the Budget Committee. Buffy Wicks replaced Assemblymember Holden. She's the chair of Appropriations. That's significant. So on her water rights bills, I expect to see she has opportunity to move her bill. Diane Pappen, Assemblymember Pappen from San Mateo on the peninsula. She's now the chair of Assembly Water Parks and Wildlife Committee. She replaced Assemblymember Rebecca Bauer-Cahan. And then other chairs, Eduardo Garcia, who is from Coachella, he's now the chair of the Environmental Safety and Toxics Materials Committee. That's the committee that deals with all the drinking water regulations, including affordability. And then Isaac Bryan, who's from Los Angeles, he's the new chair of the Natural Resources Committee, which deals with CEQA and climate change issues and forestry, just to name a few. The other thing that happened was that the Senate announced that Mike McGuire, who is from the North Coast, Senator McGuire, he will take over as President Pro Tem. He will take over from Tony Atkins on February 5th. And he is termed out on the 26th. So this is expected to be a pretty smooth transition. We don't expect to see a lot of changes. He may make some changes in some of the committees, but he's a short-termer, really. He's only going to be pro tem for 2.5 years. So I think he's going to focus on some priorities that he may have. So just wrapping up on this, again, 2024 is going to be a year of uncertainty in the state legislature. Like I said, we've got the budget issues, we've got general elections. There's not a lot of money for members who are running for office to hand out like they've had in the past. It's going to be very different, and they're going to be focused on campaigning. So a challenging year, I should say. And that completes my report.
Kathy.
Thank you.
Very much. And Eric, it was good seeing you. Welcome to California. All right, that moves us to item number 12. Consider and approve an increase to the Board of Directors' salary by an amount not to exceed 5%, effective February 1st, 2024. Is there any discussion? Are there questions? Is there a presentation?
There is no presentation. Just as a reminder that, again, it can't be more than 5%. Just for some context, last year, the employees received 5.4% for an increase. And it's really up for the board to discuss what they would like.
I'll make my usual, I'll be happy to move this and make my usual comment, which is that I think it's important that we make these offices that we hold as accessible to people as possible. We don't pay a lot, but I think keeping up with the pay level that we do have is important so that people don't have to have a large enough income to be able to take off a couple days a month to be able to hold this office. I would also point out, looking for it in the document here, that the total amount that this 5% increase, and I would move that it be a 5% increase, is a total of, I can't find it now, but $2,500 essentially for all the board members for the entire year. $2,695 would be the estimated cost for fiscal year 2024.
Cover the increase for all of them.
For all of
For all,
us,
just for the fiscal year,
Just for the fiscal year.
the remainder of this fiscal year.
Yeah, okay, right.
That's a combined.
Thank you. That's a combined.
No, you're not getting a 25.
Right. So anyway, with that, I'll move for a 5% increase.
I would second the motion.
All third.
I'm sorry.
Bill's second.
Okay. Bill Hurts. Any questions, John?
I'll be voting no like I normally do.
Yes.
And John, what's the reasoning for that?
Well, a couple reasons.
You paid too much.
Huh?
You get paid too much.
Not as much as that. When I first ran, I didn't run on that reason for the pay that we receive. And, there's a lot of people suffering, maybe not in my ward, but there's a lot of people suffering in other areas, and they would love to get a 5% increase regardless what their salary is, hourly or whatever, that are more worthy of getting that.
All right.
I'm sorry, will you be turning down your pay increase or just voting against it?
Maybe I will.
Okay.
That's a good question. All right, we have a motion and a second. If there's no further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Yes, as an opposed.
Any abstentions? All right. You got it, Rish?
Yes.
All right, that moves us, we're going to remove, well, we have a speaker on items 13 and 14. Do you want to speak before or after? You bet. All right, so, should we have a presentation? Well, why don't you come up, Yvette, and speak on item 13?
Madam President, there is no presentation. There is an oral report that the board is required to give. It's in
Okay.
your speaker notes, and we can have that after the public.
All
speak.
right,
So who's supposed to be getting who's first? Is it Clifford or Derek?
So item 13 is the general manager, and item 14 is the general counsel. And you're speaking on item 13. Your 3 minutes start now.
Thank you. I am, of course, going to object to, even though it's going to be approved, I'm going to object to Clifford getting a raise and an extension of his contract for several reasons. But the fact that he ratified a sugar-coated DEI report that excluded Mr. Briggs' data, that he's ratified retaliation against me because he supervises the employees that have moved forward with forcing me or threatening me with discipline if I didn't engage in a mandatory mediation, and those people were Derry Moten, Janelle Sambra Wallace, Tony Montano, David Carlson, Ed Betancourt, Cindy Sharon, Adam Smyer. I think I covered everybody. In my opinion, to give you a raise and to continue your contract, given your inaction with all of these unfair labor practices at the district, I think it's a miscarriage of district ratepayer funds to give you a raise and to let you continue. But of course, I know the board is going to move forward anyway. Just wanted to log my objection officially during a board meeting. Thank you.
thank you.
In moving approval, or is public comment complete?
Yeah, but I needed to read something.
Yes.
According to Risha. So we are now on agenda item 13 to consider a resolution to authorize an amendment to the agreement for employment of General Manager Clifford C. Chan to provide for a merit pay increase of 5% to the base salary effective January 15, 2024. Pursuant to Government Code Section 54953C3, the Board of Directors is providing an oral report prior to taking action on agenda item 13 regarding the salary schedule, and compensation paid in the form of fringe benefits to the general manager. In accordance with the employment agreement with the general manager, the board may authorize base salary increases to the general manager based on annual performance evaluations conducted by the board. As such, it is recommended that the general manager receive a 5% increase in his base salary effective January 15, 2024. There are no other changes recommended to the employment agreement at this time. The current term remains with an end date of July 22nd, 2026. All right, and a voice vote is required.
President McIntosh covered the clarification I would have made. I move approval.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second.
Andy, do you have are you making the oral report from the ad hoc, from the,
President McIntosh made the report.
oh, that's the report, okay.
Yeah, that's the report. We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Any,
Oppose.
all right, one opposition. Any abstentions? All right. We'll move on to item 14. Yvette Rivera, come on up.
Thank you.
You're here.
Thank you, Ms. Director McIntosh. I'm also here to object to Derek McDonald's contract extension and his raise. I know the board supposedly supervises you. For that reason, I sent you and the board, I emailed it a few seconds ago, the California Bar Rules of Professional Conduct for Lawyers. Because you supervised Lourdes Matthews, and I believe that she has participated in retaliating against me and other employees at the district. I'm going to hope that you pay attention to Rule 8.4.1, prohibited discrimination, harassment, and retaliation, and read the highlighted paragraph where it says, "Conduct that violates this rule undermines the confidence in the legal profession. A lawyer may not engage in such conduct through the acts of another. In relation to a law firm's operation includes government. This rule imposes on all law firm lawyers the responsibility to advocate corrective action to address known harassing or discriminatory conduct by the firm, which includes the government, or of any other lawyers or non-lawyer personnel." I'm going to leave it at that. Again, I'm here to just log my public opposition to you getting a raise and extension of your contract, given all of the retaliation that I've been subjected to and questionable employment law support that HR has gotten from your department. Thank you, I yield.
We are now on agenda item 14.
One moment, I have one hand for public comment online,
All right.
okay?
I know who that is.
George Cleveland, you should be able to unmute your mic, and your 3 minutes will start now.
Thank you, Risha. Good afternoon, President McIntosh, fellow members of the board. I saw this item on the agenda and it was an eye-opener because, 8%, that's very interesting because, I'm retired now, but in past years in negotiations, the rank and file had to struggle and beg and plead and shout and moan and groan and go through all sorts of a lengthy procedure just to get up to maybe 4 or 5%. I think the board might have a short memory. It's my belief that our general counsel's department is the reason that we had to reopen the last round of negotiations because of PEPRA. During those talks, we had repeatedly asked management if what we were proposing was within the scope of the law, and we were repeatedly told yes. And then we had basically an oops moment afterwards, at which time the general counsel's office did not take any responsibility for that, and simply management put out HR to give a dog and pony show as to how it was going to be fixed. The other thing I'm concerned about is I keep hearing this bit about a settlement for the Shante Scott lawsuit, which I find peculiar because if I remember correctly, Ms. Scott was on probation when she was let go from her probationary appointment. Further, in her time in that appointment, she put the life in jeopardy of one of the employees of the district and didn't really do anything that resulted in a change in the way that EBMUD does its business with its customers when their bills are overdue. So I'm really concerned that we're having this go on with these types of actions that were taken or not taken by the general counsel's office. And now I'm a ratepayer, so I think I can weigh in on that. It's just 8%. I mean, that's silly. I fail to understand why the general counsel will get if there's going to be a raise, why the individual will get a larger percentage raise than the general manager and a significantly larger raise than any member of the district community, meaning specifically the employees. No employee is going to get a raise of 8%. So I'm not sure how this individual is so much more valuable than the rest of the district employees. And so that's all I have to say about it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, George. We are now on agenda item 14 to consider a resolution to authorize an amendment to the agreement for employment of General Counsel Derek T. McDonald to provide for a merit pay increase of 8% to the base salary effective January 15th, 2024, and to extend the agreement for an additional one-year term through July 4th, 2025. Pursuant to Government Code Section 54953C3, the Board of Directors is providing an oral report prior to taking action on agenda item 14 regarding the salary schedule, and compensation paid in the form of fringe benefits. to the General Counsel. In accordance with the employment agreement with the General Counsel, the board may authorize base salary increases to the General Counsel's based on annual performance evaluations conducted by the board. As such, it is recommended that the General Counsel receive a merit pay increase of 8% to the base salary effective January 15, 2024, and an extension of its agreement for an additional one-year term through July 4th, 2025. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All right. Bill had to step out.
Do you want to wait for Director Patterson to come back?
We don't,
Have a quorum.
yeah, we have a quorum. So, all right. We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Opposed.
Any abstentions? All right. Thank you. We're on to item 15. Oh, I need to point something out too. All of these were stapled together with the federal ledge update. So the board committees and workshops is under there as well as the water supply update. So you have to just do a pull apart.
Actually, you can just, if you flip through, so you have your federal update, and then you have the Speakers Bureau and the water supply.
Board committees and workshops,
Correct.
yeah. All right, so we're on to item 15, 6-month forecast of board committee and workshop topics for 2024 and summary of 2023 committee and workshop topics.
Yeah, so Risha, if you can pull up and maybe move through the slides for me. But as you're doing that, one of the things that we heard at the board retreat was that the board would like provide some feedback on the workshops that we have planned for this year, as well as the committee. If you go to the next slide, Risha. This is just a reminder, planning and ledge HR are the second Tuesdays of the month, and the finance administration is the fourth Tuesday. And we do sustainability quarterly. If you go to the next slide.
Clifford, did you ask about feedback?
Yes. So I didn't think you were going to change the schedule for the committee meetings, but if you'd like to change that too, we can certainly do that. But I didn't think that was a topic for discussion. It was more on the subjects. Today is an opportunity to provide feedback, but I also just want to let the board know that you can provide me feedback at any time on any of these topics. But I did want to run through what we have, and it's on your screen right now, but what we have for the workshops. One of the requests that we heard last year was to come to the board to do a climate change, climate action workshop, which is scheduled for the next board meeting. Back in 2018, we did our recycle water strategic plan workshop with the board, and the board had asked that we come back in 5 years to do another recycle water strategic plan update, which is why we have it scheduled for February. The board approved a contract to do a cost of service study, and one of the things that was discussed was to come back to the full board to do a workshop on the cost of service, so you'll see that in April. We have our normal mid-cycle budget workshop in May. Another request that we heard at the retreat was to do a labor negotiations workshop, which we tentatively have scheduled for either May or June. We'll have to still work out some scheduling items. We also heard from the board that you want an annual infrastructure update. So we have that scheduled for October. And then we also have the rate structure discussion, which coincides, it's related to the cost of service. And then the last one, which is either going to be in November or December, is to get feedback from the board on the FERC relicensing, which we talked about at committee last year as well. So this is what we heard, but again, we also heard, what you don't see here is the long-term water supply workshop. That was something you said didn't have to be annual. And then the customer assistance program, this is something where we had talked about, as we're implementing some of the things we discussed, bring those items to committee, which we have scheduled for committee updates on progress on the customer assistance program items. So any feedback now, but again, it's not limited to today. You can provide me feedback on these workshops throughout the year or any other topics that you would like to workshop.
Is there a reason to put the infrastructure and rate structure things and the tour in the same month? Kind of seems, that's also the month that there's the party barbecue, to not do something and potentially to change that to, one of those to September instead of October. It just seems like October feels a little heavy.
We've done October and then November in the past, but let me look at the schedule, and if we can fit in September and work it out. The reason why we do it towards the fall is this is what feeds into our budget workshop, which begins in January. So we're looking for board feedback on what we plan, since the capital improvement program drives a lot of our budget. And calendar year 2025, the first half is when we're going to be, having workshops on our budget.
Can I also make one clarification? One clarification, Clifford, the rate structure discussion is a part of the cost of service discussion, and so that's the second part, and that's why that's staff
Well, it's
scheduled.
part 2 of cost of service.
Correct, and that's why it's scheduled around that time.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
we can work on the schedule to make it fit, because there are other activities in October, as you described.
Andy?
Just providing my feedback, I think our completing our work on cost of service study and rate structure expeditiously is important. So if we are looking at things remaining or falling off, I would definitely like to make sure that we are keeping our second workshop on the cost of service study to have complete deliberations on the rate structure this year. I think it makes sense to have an opening to our budget process with an infrastructure workshop, and I'm open to the general manager's recommendation, working with our board president on whether a tour is feasible in terms of the time that it takes for the board to get together.
Okay.
I would just hope, and I'm sure you will, Clifford, for example, you mentioned the recycled water, that all the pertinent laws or somehow be brought in, so we're working from the most current base of what the laws are on the state and federal level for, like in this case, the recycled water, as I mentioned.
Okay, thank you. And again, you can provide feedback at any time. The next few slides, I'm not going to go through in detail, but, again, this will be a busy year for committees. One of the things I plan to do differently than I've done in the past is, once the committee chair assignments are established, I will work with the committee chairs and discuss in more detail what the plans are for the upcoming year for the committee items. You'll just notice throughout on this one, most of them are the regular updates that we've provided for the board for many, many years, and so we'll have an opportunity to talk to the committee chairs on what they would like to see. We'll also provide the periodic project updates. You'll see some of these. This is like the Walnut Creek Water Treatment Plant. One important project that's going to take up a number of committee meetings is the Los Vaqueros Reservoir Expansion Project. We do need to have feedback from the committee as we lead up to a decision on whether or not the district participates in that project. But again, provide me your feedback on these items, what you would like to see, and like I mentioned, I will work with the committee chairs, so that will be different than I've done in the past. And that is it for the workshops. And again, I look forward to working with the board and the committee chairs to make sure that we cover the items that you're most interested in discussing.
Thank you, Clifford.
Moving on, this is really, again, related to that, but is the Speakers Bureau. We put a memo on the Speakers Bureau. Last year, we participated in about 150 events. That includes your ward events, over a dozen water walks, 9 Water Wednesday webinars. And as you're aware, these outreach efforts help us connect with and inform the communities that we work with. We're also looking for your feedback on the events that we have planned. We also heard at the board retreat that you'd like to provide input on which activities or which events you'd like us to participate in, as well as the timing and being strategic about the messaging. Just for reference, last year, the board participated in about 75 of these events, so, half of the events, and we really appreciate the board participation in these events. It really makes a big difference when you're there. So, again, not for today, but if you could provide feedback by January 23rd on any other events you'd like to participate in, that you'd like us to participate in, and which events that you would like to participate in so we can do some planning. And I just want to highlight, we are going to focus fiscal year 24 or calendar year 24 on the following themes: water supply, climate change in our climate action plan, nutrient reduction, infrastructure investment, affordability, and workforce development. So if there's some other themes that you'd like us to emphasize throughout the year, please share that with me, and we will build it into our presentations for the coming year.
I'm sorry, did you say water supply is one?
Yes.
Okay, great.
And again, any feedback that you can provide by January 23rd would be welcome. And moving on with that, we have, at the start of the new year, our first water supply update. And we have Dave Briggs here, our Director of Operations Maintenance, to provide that update.
Okay, good afternoon, President McIntosh. Thank you, Clifford. And as Clifford mentioned, it's the time of the year where we review the last water year and tell you the status of where we are so far.
Snow.
Okay, so water year 2023 that ended on September 30th, that was a great year. It was a transition year. It got us out of the drought, and there's some statistics here to impress you with. In the upper McKelvey watershed, we got probably 160% of normal precipitation. The snowpack, 67.3 inches. There should be an asterisk there because we had to estimate that because the snow exceeded the height of our gauge. There were other parts of the Sierra that set records last year. There were even a couple of pockets of the Sierra that had 50 feet of snow. So last year broke a lot of records. It wasn't the wettest year on record, probably top 5. Very, very good year. Here in the East Bay, 150% of normal, give or take, precipitation. And I will remember last year because on December 31st, we had an atmospheric river that was predicted, but the potency of that atmospheric river was very much under-predicted. It caught a lot of people by surprise in San Francisco and in stormwater management. At the beginning of that day, we were still looking at a 50, 60, 70,000 acre foot deficit of our storage. So we were below flood reservation level, looking up at our flood reservation curve. At the end of that day, we were talking about flood releases. So in 12 hours, we went from drought mode to flood release surplus mode. That was amazing. And that was an amazing storm. And there were many more that came in January on top of that. The runoff there, almost 1.5 million acre feet off of the watershed, well in excess of the average. Again, I think runoff-wise, maybe the third highest year. And we, of course, ended the year very full going into this water year.
Ask and you shall receive.
We'll ask again. Okay, our demand, which is shown here, our water production in red, halfway through almost exactly for this fiscal year. And we are well below the blue line, which is almost 20 years ago, of the average of 2005, 2007. Several droughts have happened since that period. We're about 30% below that level in terms of water production. So not really, I don't know if there's been time to rebound or if a rebound is really part of our world anymore, but we are showing a nudge above last year's water production, just 4%, but really the last few years have just really been about the same, 21, 22, 23, 24. Okay, so this is not going to be really good news that I'm going to show you, but hold on. It's not going to be the worst presentation. But we are below average so far. That probably doesn't surprise you. These numbers are through January 3rd. We've probably picked up half of an inch since. There is a wet forecast on the way. I would not be surprised if we finished at least average for January. This is here locally. And then upcountry, we're 67% of normal in terms of precipitation. Again, there's probably 4 inches forecast in the next 10 days. We'll see what we get. But we got a lot of the water year to go, so it's way too early to worry. Eagle there shown, keeping a very close watch of Comanche Reservoir. Very common. Last 2 times I've been out there, I've seen eagles, so it's wonderful to see. Snowpack, not surprising, is below normal. They got a bump just over the weekend as well, probably about a foot or 2 over the weekend, so these numbers are a little bit old, but we are, again, progressing through the water year, so even though we've picked up several inches of snow in the past week or so, it's about average, so we're kind of tracking that average line upward a little bit right now, but we're still below average on snowpack.
David, what elevation is Cape Wilson Lake at?
About 8,000 feet.
And that's what, between highways 4 and,
It's just south of 88 and north of 4.
because I know that like Bear Valley Ski Resort has some of the highest amounts of snow of almost any resort in the Sierras right now. They have 50 inches of snow at the summit.
Yeah. Here, we're still below, so maybe they're getting preferential storm tracking there. And that, well, actually, this speaks to it a little bit, Director Coleman, just looking at the Sierras as a whole, as we always do, just to get a sense of where the state is. Of course, we're focused on the Central Sierra, but very similar, if you look at the entire Central Sierra, they're roughly, a third of normal right now, so Bear Valley may be an anomaly. But yeah, in our watershed, we're still about 30% of average right now in terms of water content, as well as depth. Last year, the Southern Sierra had a record snowpack. That was one of the locations that had a record snowpack last year. Oh, in this location here, Calaveras Big Trees, so it's just off the road from Highway 4. This is at 4,700 feet elevation, so you can see what it looks like. This picture was taken, a few weeks ago. Last year, we had to dig down to find the snow gauge. So there was about 8 feet of snow here last April. These charts we show you probably about once a year. You have to take the predictions and the forecasts with this particular graphic with a grain of salt. It's a 3-month outlook. The models aren't very accurate. It's the best we have. For what it's worth, we are showing above normal conditions for California as well as the Colorado River Basin, so that's good news. The other thing I gather from this is not terribly the quantitative nature of this, but what we're not seeing right now is a ridge of high pressure above California. That's big, because you can recall that when we've had those dry years, those drought years, it's just blue sky, upper 60s temperatures. The ridge is parked above us for week after week after week, and it's blocking everything, and we're not seeing that. So the storm door is open, and we're going to see a lot of things walk in the next week or so. And the indication is that it's going to stay open. So I'm optimistic.
And Dave, do you
Yes.
think that, it looks like I know that Southern California's been getting, a lot of precipitation. But on the other hand, it feels cooler here. Is this do you think this is, is there any discussion about, are we getting higher elevation snowpack? Where's the quality of the precipitation in terms of, is it warm storms or?
I don't think I could probably say with a
Okay.
great sense of that. I mean, the next storms that are going to come in this week are cold, so we're going to see a low snow line for sure. But there is, notwithstanding Director Coleman's comment about Bear Valley, we're not seeing a lot of accumulation in our watershed at lower elevations right now.
It's kind of the way it lines up, but coming from the west toward the coast, it's centered more south than north. And that's why you got it in the LA area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely been more.
This next one is coming from north to south.
Yep.
And it's bringing the cold with it.
Yeah.
Yep. See, I'm up on this. You are.
Okay, so this is my last slide. On the left shows our tabulated storage. We're a few thousand acre feet below roll curve right now, so we maintain that 150,000 acre foot storage for flood control upcountry. We are way above average overall because we came into the year totally full. So as long-term average, we're above normal. But as a percentage of capacity, of course, we're below 100%. That's by design. We have to vacate storage for flood control and to also capture that water locally. And then if you track over to the graphic on the right, you can see where that 617,000 acre-feet of storage puts us. And from here, if you look at the three possible hydrologies, the wet, the average, or the median, and the dry, you can see what that forecasts to at the end of the year, which is really our key metric. And so even under that 90% exceedance, so again, 90% of the years are going to be wetter than this, so that red line is very conservative. It would put us at 515,000 acre-feet of carryover, and even a 99 would get us into the high fours. So I think we're not near drought territory for this year.
The December 31st, 2023 atmospheric river caused us to would be releasing in the middle of the storm?
If we had a repeat of that storm come by now,
Yeah.
yeah, we would at some point we would definitely be in flood release mode for sure.
But I
Because
mean,
we're
even
barely
in the storm,
we're barely below rule curve right now, so it's not going to take us much to get into flood release.
So is there any chance that FIRO modeling can be used at our reservoirs, particularly Part A?
We're going to talk more about that in 2 weeks, Director Coleman. The short story is it's going to be challenging to do that because our release capacity is so low. We can't, if we do get slightly more accuracy on these storms, like we get the information a day sooner or 2 days sooner, and we know with maybe 25% more accuracy with these advanced models, we can still only vacate storage at 5,000 CFS. It's just not going to be enough to really give us a powerful tool, but it will help. It's just not going to be a game changer.
Generally speaking, isn't it, when I track the weather stuff, when we have a storm here, it's about 24 hours late, 12 to 24 hours later, it hits our watershed.
Mm-hmm.
So if we have an immense storm and you look at the AQPI information from Rocky Ridge in this case, we can get an idea what's going to be happening in our watershed.
Absolutely. The only other thing I would say is, as you've heard before, atmospheric rivers have a relatively narrow profile from north to south, and that is similar to our watershed profile. So being 50 miles off, we can completely swing and miss about either getting or not getting an atmospheric river. So that's probably the best way it might help. Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
It attaches the monthly report. I can certainly answer any questions you may have.
That was quite a monthly report, Clifford. There was a lot going on.
December was a big month.
Yes.
Thanks to all staff.
I already told him.
Okay. That moves us to reports and director comments. Are there any director comments or reports?
I have a report from the planning committee this morning.
Oh, we're about to move to committee reports.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so no comments from directors? All right, then we'll move from item.
Did you have one?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I just wanted to say that we need to remember something as we trail through all of this. It has an impact on our staff. We're experiencing some of the highest crime rate in the history of the state in this area. Los Angeles, similar. And some of the things that are happening right now have a direct bearing. I think boning up on the kinds of comments that we got from staff today, where they're servicing projects. Sometimes the project is going to be delayed because you won't be able to get into the area without some kind of special assistance. That's being looked into. The warning signs and break-ins for some of our places that we have copper and other things stored that the criminals want because they can go out and resell it, the metal and whatnot. These are some things that I think as we look at overall that have some impact on us in our service. The other thing is Southern California got more homeless than we do, and we think we're the big picture. I know because in my ward, I've got it. And much of the help that was sent to help those areas may be curtailed given the national scene and what is happening. But people need help, the kind of help that we're giving them. We're not only helping them with the water bill, we're giving them financial acumen so that they understand how to handle their finances. These are important contributions that we're making. And as I go over my assessment of our district and the role that it plays and being aware and sensitive to all these things, that's why I said one of the wisest choices we made was putting Clifford in as general manager. He runs the scope of things. He's not dwelling on one thing. He may not like something about this, that, or the other, but he gets the job done. And Derek is accurate as a attorney. Look at all the cases that we've come across, and we won most of them, or we settled them in favor of the district. So I commend you on that. I think the thing I'm trying to say is we have to keep a perspective, and we have to see big picture beyond our ward, beyond where we are, the picture of the whole piece and how we're dependent on each other. You know, the governor's trying to run for president next time. He's joining all the big stuff, getting a vote from Southern California. I understand a lot more than we get from right here because I read beyond the page. But I'm trying to focus on us within. We have a good team. And going forward, if we all come together and work together, we will make this year the best year of East Bay Mud, even with all the negative stuff going on. And I just wanted to commend staff, especially those of you who come in contact with this. That's my 2 cents.
Okay. Doug, did you?
I'll talk about the planning committee, but thank you, Bill, for those words. I think
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
inspiring to all of us for this year. So we had 2 items on the planning committee this morning. We talked about ADUs and junior ADUs. And as Lisa remarked several times, this is pretty complicated and confusing, but has a lot to do with how we try to serve the ADUs, these accessory dwelling units. And so we got a briefing on that, very interesting and very useful. One of my takeaways was, as expensive as it is to provide extra line to the ADUs, and as much as we'd like to keep the costs low, it is expensive to put in a new line to these. And one of the other things is that there are a lot of ADUs being approved or being applied for that we're not even hearing about, and that could be a problem that comes back to bite us, so we're working on that. The second item was the Walnut Creek Water Treatment Plant pre-treatment project. This is a project that's been going on for a long time. As Justin Young pointed out earlier, this is really one of the biggest projects since Freeport. We got a briefing on the why it's being done, because we need a much more reliable and broader range of water quality treatment there. And the draft EIR was published in September 2023. The final will come out in June 2024, and we'll be asked to vote on this as a contract in the next board meeting.
That's my report.
Thank you, Doug. And John has
Yeah.
a report on DERWA.
I have a report on DERWA. We met on December 11th in San Ramon, in Dublin, I'm sorry. A couple of the items, we approved the minute meetings, treasury reports, and quarterly investment reports. We accepted the independent auditor's report. We discussed the possibility of DERWA cash reserve policy. And then we appointed on an interim basis, somebody who all of you will recognize, Richard Sykes. He does UMRA, but he's going to be on an interim service for DERWA, and then we discussed the authority manager recruitment.
Wow.
That's it.
Just can't get a good man to retire.
He stays in.
Stays in the fight.
I have for Ledge HR, we met this morning and we discussed two items: Employees Retirement System Board Health Insurance Benefit Study. And then the second item was the proposed revisions to the EBMUD's campaign finance reform. And those will be coming back to us with further updates. Item 3 and 4, we had to move over to this afternoon's regular agenda. We ran out of time. That's my report for Ledge HR. Please submit items for future consideration to the general manager and his office. And are there any director comments? If not, we are hereby adjourned.